Somewhere off the coast of North Carolina, beneath the shifting sands of the Outer Banks or in the murky waters of Pamlico Sound, there may be a fortune in pirate gold that hasn't been touched by human hands in over 300 years. It belonged to the most terrifying pirate who ever lived, a man who made himself into a demon, who cultivated fear the way other men cultivate crops, and who took the secret of his treasure's location to a watery grave on a November morning in 1718. If you're settling in for the night, this is exactly the kind of story that works perfectly for sleep. Long, slow, full of history and mystery and darkness. If you enjoy it, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next journey into forgotten history. And if you want to tell me where you're listening from tonight, drop a comment. I love knowing that someone in Tokyo, and someone in London, and someone in a small town in Ohio are all drifting off to the same ancient mysteries together. Now let's go back to a time when the Atlantic Ocean was the most dangerous place on Earth, when a black flag on the horizon meant death or worse, and when one man's name was spoken in terrified whispers from the Caribbean to the coast of Virginia. Let's talk about the man they called Blackbeard. His real name was probably Edward Teach, though you'll find it spelled Thatch in some records, and the truth is we don't know much about his early life with any certainty. He may have been born in Bristol, England, around 1680, a port city that sent ships to every corner of the known world. He may have gone to sea as a young man, learning the sailor's trade on merchant vessels, or perhaps on privateers during Queen Anne's War. He may have served in the Royal Navy, learning naval tactics and the art of ship-to-ship combat. Or he may have come from somewhere else entirely, his origins deliberately obscured by a man who understood that mystery was a weapon. What we know for certain is that Edward Teach appears in the historical record around 1716, already a fully formed pirate operating in the Caribbean. He wasn't starting from nothing. He had skills, experience, and a reputation that was growing with every ship he captured. He had joined the crew of Benjamin Hornigold, one of the most successful pirates of the era, and he was learning from a master. Hornigold recognized something in Teach, some combination of intelligence and ruthlessness and charisma that marked him as more than an ordinary pirate. Within a year, Hornigold had given Teach command of his own vessel, a captured sloop that would be the first of many ships under Blackbeard's command. This was the beginning of a legend that would outlast empires. But to understand why Blackbeard became so successful, and why his treasure remained so elusive, you have to understand what made him different from every other pirate sailing those waters. Blackbeard understood something that most criminals never grasp. He understood that fear is more valuable than violence. A pirate who had to fight for every prize would eventually lose. Ships would resist, crews would be killed, vessels would be damaged beyond repair. But a pirate who could make ships surrender without a fight, who could convince captains that resistance meant something worse than death, that pirate could operate indefinitely. He could take prize after prize with minimal casualties, keeping his crew intact and his ships in fighting condition. So Blackbeard set out to become the most terrifying human being on the Atlantic Ocean, and he succeeded beyond anything the world had seen before. Start with his appearance. Blackbeard was tall, powerfully built, with a presence that dominated any room or deck he stood upon. But it was his beard that gave him his name and his power. He grew it long and wild, a massive tangle of black hair that covered most of his face and hung down to his chest. He braided it into multiple tails, sometimes tying ribbons into the braids, and he wove slow-burning fuses into the whole mass. When he went into battle, he would light these fuses, wreathing his head in smoke and sparks like some creature crawled up from hell itself. Imagine seeing that coming toward you across the deck of your ship. A giant of a man, his face barely visible behind a wall of black hair, smoke curling around his head, his eyes gleaming through the haze. He wore a sling across his chest holding 6 pistols, all loaded and ready. He carried multiple cutlasses and daggers. He looked less like a man than like a demon given physical form, and that was exactly what he intended. The effect on his victims was devastating. Ships would surrender at the mere sight of his flag, a skeleton holding an hourglass in one hand and a spear piercing a bleeding heart in the other. Captains who had sworn to defend their cargo to the death would throw down their weapons when they saw that smoking, bearded figure climbing over their gunwales. Resistance meant facing something that seemed more than human, and most men decided their cargo wasn't worth the risk. But Blackbeard's genius went beyond mere appearance. He cultivated stories about himself, spreading rumours that enhanced his terrifying reputation. He was said to have made a pact with the devil, trading his soul for supernatural powers. He was said to have murdered men for looking at him wrong, killed crew members for imagined slights, tortured prisoners for his own amusement. Some of these stories may have been true, many were probably exaggerated or invented entirely. But Blackbeard understood that the stories served his purpose whether they were true or not. The more terrifying the legend, the less he actually had to do. One famous story claims that Blackbeard once took several crew members into the hold of his ship and sealed all the hatches. Then he lit pots of brimstone, filling the enclosed space with choking sulphurous smoke. The men gasped and coughed and begged to be let out, but Blackbeard sat calmly in the poison atmosphere, breathing the fumes as if they were fresh sea air. When he finally opened the hatches, his men stumbled out half dead while Blackbeard emerged looking disappointed. According to the legend, he said something like, "Damn ye, you yellow-bellied sapsuckers, I'm a better man than all your milksops put together." What was the point of this exercise? To prove that he was literally more than human, to demonstrate that he could survive things that would kill ordinary men, to add another layer to the legend that made ships surrender without a fight. Another story claims that one night, while drinking with his crew, Blackbeard suddenly drew his pistols under the table and fired them into the crowd of legs, crippling one of his own men. When asked why he did it, he supposedly said that if he didn't kill one of them now and then, they'd forget who he was. Again, this story may or may not be true, but it served Blackbeard's purposes perfectly. A captain who might randomly murder his own crew was a captain you didn't want to cross. Even his own men lived in fear of him, which meant they followed his orders without question and fought like demons when he commanded them to fight. This combination of theatrical terror and genuine unpredictability made Blackbeard the most successful pirate of his era. Between 1716 and 1718, he captured at least 40 ships. Some sources put the number much higher. He ranged from the Caribbean to the coast of Virginia, taking prizes wherever he found them, and no one could stop him. The colonial authorities were terrified of him. The Royal Navy couldn't catch him. Merchant captains plotted their routes specifically to avoid areas where Blackbeard might be operating, adding weeks to their voyages just to stay clear of that smoking demon. His most famous prize came in November 1717, when he captured a French slave ship called La Concorde. This was a substantial vessel, over 200 tons, designed to carry human cargo across the Atlantic. Blackbeard saw its potential immediately. He took the ship, released most of the enslaved people who were aboard, kept those who wanted to join his crew, and set about converting La Concorde into the most fearsome pirate ship in the Atlantic. He renamed her Queen Anne's Revenge. The name was probably a reference to Queen Anne of England, who had died in 1714, and whose war against France had employed many of the privateers who later turned to piracy when peace left them unemployed. The Revenge suggested that Blackbeard saw himself as continuing a legitimate struggle that the Crown had abandoned. Or perhaps he just liked the way it sounded. Either way, Queen Anne's Revenge became Blackbeard's flagship, the vessel that carried him to the height of his power. He mounted 40 guns on her decks, making her one of the most heavily armed pirate ships ever to sail. He crewed her with over 300 men, an army of pirates loyal to their terrifying captain, and he used her to blockade the entire port of Charleston, South Carolina, in one of the most audacious acts of piracy in American history. The Charleston blockade happened in May 1718, near the end of Blackbeard's career. He positioned Queen Anne's Revenge and several smaller vessels at the mouth of Charleston Harbour, and simply stopped all traffic in or out. For nearly a week, one of the most important ports in colonial America was held hostage by a pirate fleet. Ships trying to leave were captured. Ships trying to enter were turned back or seized. The entire economy of the region ground to a halt while Blackbeard made his demands. What did he want? Not gold, surprisingly. Blackbeard demanded medical supplies, a chest of medicines to treat various ailments that were afflicting his crew. This seemingly modest demand has puzzled historians for centuries. Some think it suggests that Blackbeard and his men were suffering from syphilis or some other disease that required specific treatments. Others think he was deliberately asking for something small and easy to provide, demonstrating his power without pushing the colonists to desperate resistance. Whatever his reasoning, the people of Charleston gave him what he wanted. They had no choice. The Royal Navy wasn't coming to save them. Their own ships couldn't match Blackbeard's firepower. They sent a boat with the medicines, Blackbeard released his hostages, and the blockade ended. But the message had been delivered. Blackbeard could close down an entire colonial port whenever he wanted. No one on the Atlantic seaboard was safe from his reach. This was the peak of Blackbeard's power. He commanded a fleet of ships, hundreds of men, and the fear of everyone from the Caribbean to New England. He had accumulated wealth from dozens of successful raids, treasure that would be worth millions in today's currency, and he had seemingly unlimited freedom to continue his depredations for as long as he wanted. But something was about to change. Within 6 months of the Charleston blockade, Blackbeard would be dead, his treasure vanished, and the mystery of what happened to his fortune would begin. Let that thought settle into your mind as we continue deeper into this story. A pirate at the height of his power, feared by everyone, seemingly untouchable. What happened to bring him down? And more importantly, what happened to all that treasure? The answers are stranger than any legend. The summer of 1718 should have been the beginning of Blackbeard's long and profitable retirement. He had spent 2 years terrorizing the Atlantic, accumulating wealth beyond calculation, and building a reputation that made strong men tremble. But even the most successful pirate eventually has to think about the future, about what happens when luck runs out or age catches up. Blackbeard was no fool. He knew that the pirate's life had a limited shelf life, that sooner or later the Royal Navy would catch up with him, or a lucky shot would end his career. He needed an exit strategy, and in the summer of 1718 one appeared. King George I of England had issued a royal proclamation offering pardons to any pirate who surrendered before September 5, 1718. This wasn't unprecedented. Colonial authorities had tried similar amnesties before, hoping to reduce piracy by giving pirates a way out of their dangerous profession. The terms were simple: give up piracy, swear loyalty to the crown, and your previous crimes would be forgiven. No prosecution, no hanging, no gibbet cage on the waterfront, just a clean slate and a chance to start over. For a pirate like Blackbeard, this was an interesting opportunity. He had wealth accumulated from years of successful raids. He had skills that could be valuable in legitimate maritime commerce. He had contacts and knowledge that could serve him well in a new career. And he had the intelligence to see that the golden age of piracy couldn't last forever, that eventually the colonial authorities would get serious about eliminating pirate threats. In June 1718, just a month after the Charleston blockade, Blackbeard sailed into Bathtown, North Carolina, and surrendered to Governor Charles Eden. He claimed his pardon, swore to give up piracy, and apparently settled down to live as a respectable citizen. He even married a local woman, reportedly his 14th wife, and seemed ready to embrace domestic tranquility. But nothing about this situation was quite what it appeared to be. Governor Eden was spectacularly corrupt. He had been taking bribes from pirates for years, allowing them to operate from North Carolina in exchange for a share of their profits. His relationship with Blackbeard wasn't that of a law-enforcing governor and a reformed criminal. It was more like a business partnership between two men who understood that the rules didn't apply to them. Blackbeard kept some of his ships and most of his crew. He maintained his connections with other pirates operating in the area, and within months of claiming his pardon, he was back at sea, capturing ships just as he had before. The pardon was a sham, a legal fiction that provided cover for continuing exactly the same activities that had made him famous. Governor Eden looked the other way. So did Tobias Knight, the colony's secretary and collector of customs, who was receiving regular payments from Blackbeard in exchange for his cooperation. As long as Blackbeard kept the money flowing to the right people, he could operate with something close to official protection. But this cosy arrangement attracted attention from places Blackbeard couldn't bribe. Virginia's governor, Alexander Spotswood, was watching the situation in North Carolina with growing alarm. Spotswood was a different kind of colonial administrator, ambitious and relatively honest, determined to make his mark by dealing with the pirate threat that Eden was enabling. He saw Blackbeard operating openly just south of his border, saw ships being captured and goods being fenced through corrupt North Carolina officials, and decided to act. There was a problem, though. Blackbeard was in North Carolina, not Virginia. Spotswood had no legal authority to send forces into another colony. What he was contemplating was essentially an invasion, an unauthorized military operation on foreign territory. If it went wrong, Spotswood could face serious consequences, maybe even criminal charges. But Spotswood decided the risk was worth it. Blackbeard was too dangerous to leave alone, and Eden was clearly never going to deal with him. In November 1718, Spotswood organised a secret expedition to kill or capture the most feared pirate in the Atlantic. He hired 2 small sloops, the Jane and the Ranger, and placed them under the command of Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy. Maynard was given approximately 60 men, nowhere near enough to match Blackbeard's full force, but hopefully enough to handle whatever portion of his fleet they might encounter. The expedition sailed on November 17th, heading south toward the Outer Banks where Blackbeard was known to anchor. What happened next would become one of the most famous naval battles in history, the death of a legend and the beginning of a mystery that persists to this day. Blackbeard was anchored in Ocracoke Inlet, a narrow passage through the barrier islands that protected the shallow waters of Pamlico Sound. He had only one ship with him, the Adventure, a smaller vessel than Queen Anne's Revenge but still formidable. His crew was reduced as well, maybe 24 men compared to the hundreds he had commanded at his peak. Some accounts say he was celebrating, that he and his men had been drinking heavily the night before Maynard arrived. If so, they were about to pay for their carelessness. Maynard's sloops arrived at Ocracoke on the evening of November 21st, but the water was too shallow and the light too poor to attempt an attack. They anchored nearby and waited for morning, knowing that Blackbeard would see them and have time to prepare. When dawn came on November 22nd, 1718, both sides knew that battle was inevitable. The fight started with Blackbeard trying to escape. He cut his anchor cable and made for the shallow channels he knew better than any Royal Navy officer. Maynard followed, but his ships were unfamiliar with these waters. One of them, the Ranger, ran aground almost immediately, leaving Maynard's Jane to continue the pursuit alone. Blackbeard saw his advantage. He turned the Adventure and fired a devastating broadside at point-blank range. The effect was catastrophic. Maynard lost 20 men in that single volley, killed or wounded by grapeshot and chain. His ship was crippled, seemingly helpless. Blackbeard moved in for the kill. This should have been the end of the battle and the beginning of another Blackbeard legend. A Royal Navy expedition sent to destroy him, itself destroyed by superior tactics and firepower. But Maynard was cleverer than Blackbeard realised. He ordered his surviving men to hide below decks, leaving the Jane apparently deserted except for himself and the helmsman. When Blackbeard's pirates swarmed over the gunwales expecting easy plunder, they found themselves facing an ambush. Maynard's men surged up from below, and the deck of the Jane became a slaughterhouse. The fighting was hand to hand, cutlasses and pistols at close range, no quarter asked or given. Blackbeard and Maynard found each other in the chaos. Both men fired their pistols. Maynard's shot hit Blackbeard but didn't stop him. They drew swords and fought, Blackbeard's superior strength against Maynard's desperation. Blackbeard broke Maynard's sword with a powerful blow and was drawing back for the killing stroke when one of Maynard's men slashed him across the throat from behind. Even that didn't stop him immediately. Blackbeard continued fighting, bleeding from his throat and from multiple other wounds, finally collapsing only after receiving 5 musket ball wounds and more than 20 sword cuts. When they examined his body afterward, they counted the injuries and marvelled that any man could have kept fighting so long with so much damage. The demon had been more than human after all, or at least more than an ordinary human. But he was dead now, and Maynard wanted proof. He cut off Blackbeard's head and hung it from the bowsprit of his ship, a trophy to show Governor Spotswood and the world that the great pirate was finally finished. Blackbeard's body was thrown overboard, and according to legend it swam around the ship 3 times before finally sinking. That's almost certainly not true, but it shows how the mythology continued to grow even after his death. The headless corpse of the demon pirate still fighting, still refusing to accept defeat even in death. The Battle of Ocracoke was over. Blackbeard was dead. But the mystery was just beginning. Because when Maynard's men searched the Adventure, when they went through Blackbeard's camp on shore, when they interrogated the surviving pirates, they found almost nothing. A few pounds in cash, some trade goods, some navigation equipment. Nothing that looked like the treasure of a man who had spent 2 years capturing ships and accumulating wealth. Where was the money? Where were the gold and silver and jewels from 40 or more successful raids? Where was the fortune that should have made Blackbeard one of the richest pirates in history? That question has haunted treasure hunters for more than 300 years. The disappearance of Blackbeard's treasure is one of the great mysteries of pirate history. We know he captured at least 40 ships over the course of his career. We know that many of these ships carried valuable cargo, gold and silver coins, trade goods worth substantial sums, personal property of wealthy passengers. We know that Blackbeard operated for approximately 2 years, long enough to accumulate significant wealth even by pirate standards. And we know that almost none of this treasure was ever found. The mathematics don't work. Pirates typically divided their plunder according to a system of shares, with the captain receiving a larger portion and ordinary crew members receiving smaller but still substantial amounts. Even after these divisions, even after expenses for food and ammunition and ship repairs, even after bribes to corrupt officials like Governor Eden, Blackbeard should have had a personal fortune measured in thousands of pounds. In today's money, that would be millions of dollars. But when he died, he was apparently nearly broke. The treasure simply wasn't there. Several explanations have been proposed over the centuries, and tonight we're going to explore each of them in depth. Because somewhere in these theories lies the truth about what happened to Blackbeard's fortune, and possibly, just possibly, the key to finding it. The first and most boring explanation is that Blackbeard spent it all. Pirates were famous for burning through their money with incredible speed. They would capture a fortune one month and be penniless the next, having wasted everything on drinking, gambling, women, and extravagant purchases that made no economic sense. The pirate ports of the Caribbean were designed to separate pirates from their money as efficiently as possible, with taverns and brothels and gambling dens competing for their gold. If Blackbeard followed this pattern, there might simply be nothing left to find. He earned a fortune, spent a fortune, and died with empty pockets like so many pirates before him. But this explanation doesn't quite fit what we know about Blackbeard's character. He wasn't a typical pirate. He was calculating, strategic, always thinking several moves ahead. He cultivated his terrifying image deliberately. He managed his crew through a combination of fear and charisma that kept them loyal for years. He negotiated complex arrangements with corrupt officials. He took advantage of the royal pardon to create a legal cover for his continued operations. Does this sound like a man who would spend everything without keeping something in reserve? Blackbeard was smart enough to know that his luck couldn't last forever. He was smart enough to arrange a pardon when one became available. He was smart enough to cultivate relationships with powerful people who could protect him. Wouldn't he also be smart enough to set aside money for the future, to hide a portion of his earnings somewhere safe against the day when he might need to disappear? The second explanation is that Blackbeard's partners got everything. We know he had corrupt relationships with Governor Eden and Tobias Knight. We know he paid them regular bribes in exchange for protection. We know that these men had access to Blackbeard's operations and probably knew details of his finances that others didn't. What if Eden and Knight took everything when things went bad? What if they saw Spotswood's expedition coming and decided to seize Blackbeard's treasure before it could be captured or traced back to them? This theory has some appeal because it explains why no treasure was found and why no one ever came forward with information about its location. Eden and Knight would have had strong motivation to keep quiet. Admitting they had the treasure would have been admitting their corrupt relationship with Blackbeard, which would have ended their careers and possibly their lives. They could have quietly converted the treasure to legitimate wealth over time, leaving no trace for future treasure hunters to follow. But this theory also has problems. Blackbeard wasn't the kind of man you stole from. He shot his own crew members to maintain discipline. He cultivated a reputation for irrational violence precisely so that people would be afraid to cross him. Would Eden and Knight really have risked his revenge by taking his treasure? And if they did take it, how did they do so without anyone knowing? Blackbeard had loyal crew members who would have noticed if significant treasure was being removed. News would have spread through the pirate community. Someone would have talked eventually. The third explanation is the one that treasure hunters prefer, the one that has launched hundreds of expeditions and consumed countless fortunes in the searching. Blackbeard buried his treasure somewhere and never told anyone where. According to this theory, Blackbeard knew he couldn't keep large amounts of valuable goods on his ship or in any location that might be searched. He needed a hiding place that only he knew about, somewhere he could return to when he finally decided to retire for good. So he buried his gold on a beach somewhere, or hid it in a cave, or sank it in shallow water marked by landmarks only he could recognize. He intended to come back for it when the time was right, but the time never came. Maynard's expedition caught him before he could retrieve his treasure, and the secret of its location died with him on the deck of the Adventure. This theory fits Blackbeard's character well. He was secretive, paranoid, trusting no one completely. He would have had both the motivation and the ability to hide treasure without telling anyone. and the lack of any treasure on his ship or in his camp supports the idea that he kept his wealth somewhere else entirely. But if Blackbeard buried his treasure, where did he put it? The North Carolina coast where he operated is hundreds of miles long, with countless potential hiding places. The Outer Banks are a chain of barrier islands with shifting sands and changing inlets that would make any buried treasure almost impossible to find after 300 years. The sounds behind the islands are shallow and murky, full of places where a chest could be sunk and never seen again. And Blackbeard operated throughout this area, knowing it intimately, having access to hiding places that no one else would ever discover. Treasure hunters have focused on several specific locations over the years. Ocracoke Island, where Blackbeard made his final stand, is the most obvious target. He clearly knew this area well enough to use it as a base of operations. He would have had time and opportunity to bury treasure somewhere on the island or in the surrounding waters. Searches of Ocracoke have continued for centuries, using everything from shovels to metal detectors to ground-penetrating radar. So far, nothing significant has been found. But Ocracoke has changed dramatically since Blackbeard's time. The coastline has shifted, inlets have opened and closed, sand has moved in ways that would make any buried treasure almost impossible to locate. Blackbeard might have buried his gold under a distinctive tree that fell down 200 years ago, or on a beach that has since eroded into the ocean, or near an inlet that no longer exists. Bath Town, now simply called Bath, is another focus of treasure hunting activity. This was where Blackbeard lived during his brief retirement, where he married his final wife, where he maintained his corrupt relationship with Governor Eden. If he had a home base where he felt safe, this would have been it. Some legends suggest he buried treasure on his property or somewhere nearby, intending to live off this hidden wealth for the rest of his life. Bath has been searched extensively without success. Old houses have been excavated, yards have been dug up. Nearby forests and fields have been scanned with metal detectors. The town is small enough that a systematic search should have found anything that was buried within its limits. Either the treasure isn't there, or it's buried deeper than anyone has thought to look, or it's in a location that hasn't been searched for some reason. The Pamlico Sound has also attracted attention. This large body of water lies between the Outer Banks and the mainland, providing sheltered waters where Blackbeard could operate without being easily spotted from the open ocean. He knew these waters intimately, knew where the channels ran deep and where the shallows would trap unwary pursuers. He could have sunk treasure in specific locations marked by landmarks or compass bearings, intending to retrieve it with diving equipment or at low tide. Underwater searches of Pamlico Sound have found numerous wrecks and artifacts from the colonial era, but no confirmed Blackbeard treasure. The sound is large, murky, and constantly changing, with currents that move sediment and visibility that often approaches zero. Finding anything specific in these conditions would require extraordinary luck or information that no one currently possesses. There are more exotic theories as well. Some believe Blackbeard buried treasure in the Caribbean during his earlier operations, before he ever came to North Carolina. The Cayman Islands, where pirates often stop to careen their ships, have their own Blackbeard legends. Islands throughout the Bahamas claim connections to the famous pirate. Any location where he might have stopped becomes a potential treasure site in the imagination of those who search. And then there are the theories that go beyond simple burial. Some believe Blackbeard entrusted his treasure to someone who was supposed to keep it safe. Someone who either died before revealing the location or decided to keep the treasure for themselves. Some believe the treasure was found years ago by someone who never reported the discovery, preferring to quietly convert it to legitimate wealth rather than deal with legal complications. Some believe there never was as much treasure as the legends suggest, that Blackbeard's reputation has inflated estimates of his wealth beyond anything he actually possessed. The truth is that we don't know what happened to Blackbeard's treasure because we don't have enough information to know. The historical record is fragmentary. Blackbeard left no diary, no letters, no documents describing his finances or his plans. Everything we know about his treasure comes from inference and legends are notoriously unreliable. But the mystery persists because the mathematics persist. Blackbeard captured dozens of ships over 2 years. Those ships carried valuable cargo. The treasure had to go somewhere, and wherever it went, no one has ever found it. That silence, that absence of any confirmed discovery after 3 centuries of searching, suggests that something unusual happened to Blackbeard's fortune. Either it was spent in ways that left no trace, or it was taken by people who had strong reasons to keep quiet, or it's still out there somewhere, waiting in the darkness for someone to finally discover it. Let that thought settle into your mind as we continue deeper into this mystery. The treasure exists or existed. It went somewhere. The question is where? The curse of Blackbeard's treasure is as famous as the treasure itself. According to legends that have circulated for 3 centuries, anyone who comes too close to finding Blackbeard's gold will meet a terrible end. The treasure is protected not just by its hidden location, but by something darker, something that Blackbeard himself put in place before he died, or perhaps something that attached itself to wealth accumulated through so much violence and death. These curse stories might seem like superstition, easy to dismiss in our rational modern age, but they've proven remarkably persistent, and some of the deaths and misfortunes that have befallen treasure hunters over the years are difficult to explain through coincidence alone. Whether you believe in curses or not, the stories are part of Blackbeard's legacy, woven into the mystery of his missing fortune in ways that can't be easily separated. The most famous curse story involves Blackbeard's own words. According to legend, someone once asked him whether his wife knew where his treasure was buried. Blackbeard supposedly laughed and said, "Nobody but myself and the devil knows where my treasure is, and the longest liver shall take all." This quote appears in various forms in different sources, sometimes with different wording, but the meaning is always the same. The treasure's location was a secret shared only between Blackbeard and Satan himself, and whoever lived longest between them would claim it. Since Blackbeard died in 1718, this suggests that the devil is still guarding the gold, waiting with supernatural patience for someone foolish enough to try to take it. Is this quote authentic? Probably not in its exact form. It first appears in accounts written decades after Blackbeard's death, and it has the polished feel of legend rather than the rougher edges of actual speech. But the quote might be based on something Blackbeard actually said, or it might capture something true about his personality and his relationship with his treasure. Blackbeard cultivated a demonic image. He wanted people to believe he had supernatural connections, that he was more than human, that crossing him meant facing something worse than ordinary death. Claiming that the devil was his partner in hiding treasure would have been entirely consistent with his self-created mythology. Another curse story focuses on Blackbeard's head. After Maynard cut it off, the head was hung from his ship's bowsprit and later displayed in various locations as proof of the famous pirate's death. According to some accounts, the skull was eventually cleaned, lined with silver, and converted into a drinking cup. This gruesome artifact supposedly passed through various hands over the years, bringing misfortune to everyone who possessed it. Those who drank from Blackbeard's skull were said to receive visions of where the treasure was buried, but the visions came with a price: madness, disease, violent death, financial ruin. The skull gave knowledge but took everything else, as if Blackbeard's spirit was still protecting his gold even after his body was destroyed. Several locations have claimed to possess Blackbeard's skull over the years. A fraternity at a Virginia university supposedly used it in initiation rituals. Private collectors have produced skulls they claimed were authentic. None of these claims have ever been verified, and the true fate of Blackbeard's head remains unknown. But the legend persists, adding another layer of supernatural danger to the treasure hunt. The curse is also said to manifest through more subtle means. Treasure hunters who get too close to finding Blackbeard's gold are said to suffer accidents, equipment failures, sudden illnesses, and runs of bad luck that seem to go beyond normal probability. Expeditions fall apart due to personality conflicts. Funding dries up at critical moments. Key pieces of evidence are lost or destroyed. The pattern is always the same. The closer you get to the treasure, the more the universe seems to conspire against you. Skeptics explain these patterns through psychology and statistics. Treasure hunting is inherently risky, involving dangerous locations, heavy equipment, and high-stress situations. Of course, there will be accidents and failures, and when we're looking for patterns, we tend to find them, remembering the incidents that fit our expectations and forgetting the ones that don't. The curse might be nothing more than confirmation bias operating on a foundation of normal misfortune. But the stories continue to accumulate. In the 1930s, a treasure hunter named Edward Rowe Snow investigated Blackbeard legends along the North Carolina coast. He reported numerous strange experiences: compass needles spinning wildly, unexplained lights on beaches at night, a pervasive sense of unease that made him abandon promising sites, Snow was a serious historian, not given to supernatural explanations, but he couldn't entirely dismiss what he had experienced. In the 1970s, a team of divers searching for Blackbeard's treasure in Pamlico Sound reported similar phenomena. Equipment that worked perfectly in other locations would malfunction in specific areas. Divers experienced disorientation and panic attacks that they couldn't explain. One team member died in an accident that investigators called preventable but inexplicable. The expedition was abandoned. More recently, the ongoing excavation of what is believed to be Queen Anne's Revenge has had its share of mysterious incidents. Artifacts have been damaged in unexplained ways. Staff have reported uneasy feelings in certain areas of the site. Some workers have refused to continue, citing personal experiences they declined to describe in detail. None of this proves anything, of course. Strange experiences happen on all kinds of projects, especially projects that involve danger, stress, and the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. But the accumulation of stories over 3 centuries has created a powerful narrative. Blackbeard's treasure is cursed, and those who seek it do so at their own risk. The most elaborate curse legends involve actual supernatural entities. According to some stories, Blackbeard didn't just hide his treasure. He sacrificed one or more of his crew members to create guardian spirits that would protect the gold forever. These spirits were bound to the treasure through dark rituals, condemned to remain at their posts until someone with the right knowledge or the right blood came to claim what Blackbeard had left behind. This type of guardian spirit legend is common in treasure folklore around the world. Pirates, knowing that they might die before returning for their buried gold, supposedly used human sacrifice to ensure that their treasure would be protected even in their absence. The sacrificed person's ghost would kill or drive away anyone who came too close, waiting eternally for a master who would never return. There's no historical evidence that Blackbeard or any other pirate actually performed such rituals. The stories seem to have originated in the 19th century, when romantic ideas about pirates and their practices were being elaborated in popular fiction. But the legends have attached themselves to Blackbeard more than to most other pirates. Perhaps because his cultivated demonic image made such supernatural practices seem plausible. Tonight, as you lie in the darkness listening to this story, consider what it would mean if the curse were real. Not just a story, not just a pattern of coincidences, but an actual supernatural force protecting Blackbeard's treasure from discovery. What would that force look like? How would it operate? And is it possible that the treasure has remained hidden for 3 centuries precisely because something doesn't want it to be found? These are not scientific questions, of course. They belong to the realm of folklore and imagination, the same realm where Blackbeard created his terrifying persona and spread stories about deals with the devil. But they're part of the mystery nonetheless, part of what makes Blackbeard's missing fortune so fascinating after all these years. The curse, whether real or imagined, is part of the treasure's protection. It discourages the casual searcher, adds risk to every expedition, and ensures that only the most determined treasure hunters will persist in the face of warnings and misfortune. If Blackbeard wanted to protect his gold for eternity, he could hardly have designed a better system. Let that thought settle into your mind as we move on to explore the actual searches that have been conducted, the real discoveries that have been made, and the scientific evidence that might, just might, lead us closer to the truth about what happened to the Devil's Gold. The discovery of Queen Anne's Revenge in 1996 was one of the most significant archaeological finds in the history of pirate research. After nearly 3 centuries underwater, Blackbeard's flagship had been located, and for the first time, scientists would have access to physical evidence from the most famous pirate ship that ever sailed. The story of how the wreck was found begins with a researcher named Phil Masters, who spent years studying historical records and charts to narrow down possible locations where Queen Anne's Revenge might have sunk. The ship had run aground in June 1718, just a month after the Charleston blockade, under circumstances that have never been fully explained. Some historians believe Blackbeard deliberately grounded the ship to reduce his crew size, keeping more treasure for himself and a smaller group of loyal followers. Others think it was a genuine accident that Blackbeard turned to his advantage. Either way, the ship went down near Beaufort Inlet, North Carolina, in shallow water that should have preserved at least some of the vessel and its contents. Masters' research pointed to a specific area near the inlet, and in 1996, a private research firm called Intersal Incorporated began systematic searches using magnetometers and side-scan sonar. On November 21st, 1996, almost exactly 278 years after Blackbeard's death at Ocracoke, divers discovered a shipwreck that matched the characteristics they were looking for. The wreck was in about 20 feet of water, scattered across a large area of the seafloor. Initial surveys found cannons, anchors, and other artifacts consistent with an early 18th century warship. Further investigation would confirm that this was almost certainly Queen Anne's Revenge, the most famous pirate ship in history. The excavation that followed has continued for decades and has produced thousands of artifacts. Cannons have been raised and conserved, including some still loaded and ready to fire after 3 centuries underwater. Anchors have been recovered, massive iron fixtures that speak to the size and power of the vessel. Navigational instruments have been found, including fragments of a sextant that Blackbeard himself might have used. Medical equipment has been discovered, adding support to theories that Blackbeard's demand for medicine at Charleston was genuine rather than strategic. But here's the crucial detail for treasure hunters. The excavation has produced almost no treasure. A small amount of gold dust was found mixed with lead shot, suggesting that gold was present on the ship at some point. Some personal items of value have been recovered, including sword hilts and buckles that might have belonged to officers or wealthy passengers from captured ships. But the chests of gold and silver that should have been aboard the pirate flagship simply aren't there. This absence is both disappointing and informative. It tells us that Blackbeard didn't have significant treasure on his ship when it sank, which means either he had already moved it somewhere else, or he had already spent it, or it was taken by others before the ship went down. The wreck doesn't solve the mystery of the missing treasure. If anything, it deepens it. The Queen Anne's Revenge site has also produced evidence of everyday life aboard a pirate ship. Fragments of bottles and pewter ware suggest how the crew ate and drank. Personal items like buttons and buckles show how they dressed. Tools and equipment reveal the constant work required to keep a wooden sailing vessel operational. These mundane artifacts are historically valuable, helping archaeologists understand pirate life beyond the dramatic legends. But they're not the gold that treasure hunters were hoping to find. The wreck has become a major tourist attraction and an ongoing archaeological project. A dedicated conservation laboratory in Greenville, North Carolina, processes artifacts from the site, slowly working through the enormous task of preserving materials that have spent 3 centuries underwater. The work will continue for years, perhaps decades, and new discoveries are announced periodically. But the fundamental question of Blackbeard's treasure remains unanswered. The ship doesn't have it. The question is whether the ship ever had it, and if not, where it might be instead. The discovery of Queen Anne's Revenge has also raised questions about what else might be found in North Carolina waters. If one famous pirate ship could be located after 3 centuries, why not others? Why not Blackbeard's treasure itself, if it was sunk rather than buried? Advanced sonar and magnetometer technology has been deployed throughout the region, searching for anomalies that might indicate other wrecks or underwater caches. Some promising targets have been investigated without significant results. The seafloor of the Outer Banks is littered with wrecks from various eras, and distinguishing a colonial-era pirate cache from a Civil War steamer or a World War II vessel requires careful analysis. So far, nothing has been found that definitively connects to Blackbeard's treasure. But the technology keeps improving. Every year, the tools available to underwater archaeologists become more sophisticated, capable of detecting smaller targets at greater depths with higher resolution. Techniques that were impossible a decade ago are now routine. It's entirely possible that somewhere in the murky waters of Pamlico Sound or along the shifting shoals of the Outer Banks, Blackbeard's gold is waiting to be discovered by technology that hasn't been invented yet. The land searches have been equally intensive and equally frustrating. Metal detectors have swept countless acres of coastal North Carolina, finding colonial-era artifacts, Civil War relics, and modern debris, but no confirmed Blackbeard treasure. Ground-penetrating radar has examined promising sites without detecting the underground voids that might indicate buried chests. Historical research has identified dozens of potential locations based on legends, property records, and analysis of Blackbeard's known movements. Each location has attracted its own community of treasure hunters. Ocracoke Island remains the most popular target. Blackbeard knew this area intimately. He made his final stand here. He had time and opportunity to bury treasure in the sand dunes or shallow waters that surrounded his anchorage. The island is relatively small, which should make systematic searching feasible. but the landscape has changed so dramatically over 3 centuries that any landmarks Blackbeard might have used are long gone. Modern Ocracoke is a tourist destination, with houses and hotels and roads covering much of the island. Treasure hunters have to work around private property, protected areas, and the simple fact that thousands of people have been walking over this ground for hundreds of years. If there was treasure buried in an obvious location, someone would have stumbled across it by now. Bath, the oldest town in North Carolina, has also been thoroughly searched. This was Blackbeard's home during his brief retirement, the place where he presumably felt safest, the logical location for a secret cache that he intended to access regularly. But Bath is a living community, with buildings and residents who don't appreciate treasure hunters digging up their property. Searches have been limited to public areas and cooperative landowners, leaving much of the town unexplored. The surrounding countryside has received more attention. Old plantation sites, abandoned farms, and undeveloped forests have all been investigated by treasure hunters, following various theories about where Blackbeard might have buried his gold. Some searches have been based on historical research, trying to identify locations that Blackbeard was known to visit. Others have been based on folklore, following local legends about mysterious lights or unexplained occurrences that might indicate supernatural protection of buried treasure. A few have been based on claimed supernatural guidance, treasure hunters who say they received visions or psychic impressions pointing them to specific locations. None of these approaches has produced confirmed treasure. The searches continue, driven by the persistent mathematics of the situation. Blackbeard captured dozens of ships. Those ships carried valuable cargo. The treasure went somewhere. Until someone proves where it went, the possibility of discovery remains alive, and the lure of being the one who finally finds Blackbeard's gold is powerful enough to keep treasure hunters coming back year after year, generation after generation. Understanding why Blackbeard's treasure has never been found requires understanding the man himself, not just the legend but the actual human being behind the smoking beard and the terrifying reputation. Because somewhere in his psychology, in his decisions and his relationships and his plans for the future, lies the key to what happened to his fortune. Edward Teach was not a simple man. The easy assumption is that pirates were uniformly stupid, violent and short-sighted, living only for today because tomorrow might bring the hangman's noose. Some pirates certainly fit this description. But Blackbeard was different. He showed consistent evidence of intelligence, planning and strategic thinking that set him apart from ordinary criminals. Consider his career trajectory. He didn't start as a captain. He worked his way up through Benjamin Hornigold's organization, learning from an experienced pirate, proving his worth, earning command of his own vessel through demonstrated competence. This requires patience and discipline, qualities not usually associated with impulsive criminals. Consider his management of his image. The smoking beard, the multiple pistols, the stories about deals with the devil, and random violence against his own crew. This wasn't accident or madness. This was calculated theatre, a deliberate construction of terror designed to achieve specific, practical goals. Blackbeard understood branding centuries before the concept had a name. Consider his political manoeuvring, the relationship with Governor Eden, the acceptance of the royal pardon, the complex dance of bribery and mutual benefit that allowed him to operate with something like official protection. This required social intelligence, the ability to read people and situations, to know what different parties wanted and how to give it to them while getting what he wanted in return. Consider his knowledge of the North Carolina coast. Blackbeard didn't just sail these waters, he mastered them. He knew channels that weren't on any chart, shoals that would trap pursuing vessels, inlets that appeared and disappeared with the tides. This knowledge took time to acquire and represented a significant investment in his future operations. All of this suggests a man who thought ahead, who planned for contingencies, who didn't simply spend money as it came in but considered how to protect and grow his resources over time. Does this sound like someone who would spend everything without keeping a reserve? Does this sound like someone who wouldn't have a backup plan, a hidden cache that he could access if things went wrong? The more you study Blackbeard's actual behaviour, the more the he spent it all theory seems inadequate. This was a man who planned, who prepared, who thought about the future. He would have hidden treasure somewhere. The question is where? One approach to answering this question focuses on Blackbeard's known movements and associations. We can trace his general locations throughout his career, and we can identify places where he had time and opportunity to bury significant amounts of treasure. During his early career in the Caribbean, Blackbeard operated throughout the Bahamas and surrounding waters. The region offered countless uninhabited islands and hidden coves where treasure could be buried. But it also offered countless opportunities for that treasure to be found by others. The Caribbean was heavily trafficked, with pirates, merchants, and naval vessels constantly passing through. Any treasure buried here would need to be very well hidden indeed to survive. After acquiring Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard moved his operations northward along the American coast. He operated off Virginia, the Carolinas, and as far north as Delaware. Each of these areas offered potential hiding places, but Blackbeard's connection to them was relatively brief. He was passing through, not establishing permanent bases. The most logical time for Blackbeard to bury treasure was after he took the royal pardon in June 1718. At this point, he had accumulated years of plunder, he had a fixed base at Bathtown, and he had time to make careful arrangements for his wealth. If there was ever a moment when Blackbeard had both the means and the opportunity to create a significant treasure cache, this was it. But where would he have put it? Bathtown itself seems unlikely. Too many people around, too much risk of being observed, too much chance that someone would find the cache by accident. The treasure needed to be somewhere more remote, somewhere Blackbeard could access without being watched, somewhere the casual passerby would never stumble across it. The North Carolina coast offered numerous such locations: barrier islands with shifting sands, sounds and rivers with murky waters, forests and swamps where evidence would quickly be swallowed by nature. Blackbeard knew this landscape intimately. He could have chosen a hiding place that would be essentially impossible to find without specific directions, and that's the crucial point. Blackbeard was smart enough to create a hiding place that couldn't be found by random searching. He would have used landmarks, compass bearings, measured distances from fixed points. He would have created a system that allowed him to find the treasure reliably while making it invisible to everyone else. That system died with him. Whatever markers he used, whatever measurements he took, whatever mental map guided him to his cache, all of it was lost when Robert Maynard's cutlass found its mark. The treasure might be inches away from where searchers have looked, but without Blackbeard's specific knowledge, those inches might as well be miles. Some researchers have tried to reconstruct Blackbeard's thinking to figure out what kind of location he would have chosen and what kind of system he would have used to mark it. They study his known behaviour, his associations, his movements in the final months of his life. They look for patterns that might suggest where he felt most secure, most private, most confident of returning unobserved. This approach has generated numerous theories, each with its own logic and evidence. Some researchers believe Blackbeard would have chosen a location near water, since he was fundamentally a sailor and would have felt most comfortable accessing his treasure by boat. Others believe he would have chosen high ground, where he could spot anyone approaching before they spotted him. Still others believe he would have used the natural landscape, hiding treasure in caves or under distinctive rock formations that would serve as permanent markers. None of these theories has led to discovery, but each adds to our understanding of what kind of hiding place might contain Blackbeard's gold, and each eliminates certain possibilities while highlighting others. The search continues not through random digging, but through increasingly sophisticated analysis of the limited evidence available. The relationship between Blackbeard and the corrupt officials of colonial North Carolina deserves closer examination, because it might hold clues to what happened to his treasure. Governor Charles Eden and his secretary Tobias Knight were deeply entangled with the pirate, and their involvement creates possibilities that simple theories about buried treasure don't account for. Charles Eden became governor of North Carolina in 1714, 4 years before Blackbeard arrived to claim his pardon. By all accounts, Eden was not particularly interested in enforcing laws against piracy. He was far more interested in personal profit, and pirates offered abundant opportunities for enrichment. A governor who looked the other way could expect regular payments. A governor who actively cooperated could become wealthy, beyond what his official salary would ever provide. When Blackbeard appeared at Bathtown in June 1718, Eden saw an opportunity. Here was the most successful pirate in the Atlantic, carrying wealth from dozens of captured ships, looking for a place to settle down and legitimize his operations. Eden could have arrested him, turned him over to authorities who would have hanged him, and probably received a reward for his trouble. Instead, he welcomed Blackbeard, processed his pardon, and began a profitable partnership. The exact nature of this partnership is unclear from historical records. We know that Blackbeard gave Eden gifts, including sugar and other goods from captured ships. We know that Eden provided legal cover for Blackbeard's continued operations, declaring captured vessels to be legitimate salvage rather than pirate prizes. We know that Tobias Knight served as an intermediary, handling transactions that Eden preferred to keep at arm's length. What we don't know is how deep this relationship went and what happened to the money. If Blackbeard was paying significant bribes to Eden and Knight, where did that money come from, and where did it go? The payments had to be secret, unrecorded in any official ledger, invisible to the kind of scrutiny that might come if London started asking questions about colonial governance. Money that was hidden in this way would be difficult to trace and might never appear in any historical record. This creates several possibilities regarding Blackbeard's missing treasure. The first possibility is that Eden and Knight received a much larger share than anyone realised. Blackbeard might have been paying them not just occasional bribes, but a substantial percentage of everything he earned. If so, the missing treasure was never really missing. It was simply transferred to people who had strong incentives to keep quiet about its source. Eden died in 1722, 4 years after Blackbeard. Knight died in 1719, just months after the pirate's death. Neither man left records describing payments from Blackbeard, and neither man's estate showed unusual wealth that might be traced to pirate gold. But this proves nothing. They would have been careful to hide any connection to piracy, converting their bribes to legitimate assets over time, leaving no evidence for future investigators. The second possibility is that Eden or Knight actually took physical possession of some of Blackbeard's treasure. Perhaps Blackbeard entrusted them with gold or valuables, expecting to retrieve them later. Perhaps they knew where treasure was hidden and removed it after Blackbeard's death, before anyone else could find it. They had access, opportunity, and motive. The treasure might have passed through their hands into the general economy of colonial North Carolina, untraceable after 3 centuries. The third possibility is darker. Perhaps Eden or Knight betrayed Blackbeard more actively than we realise. Perhaps they were the source of the information that allowed Spotswood to plan his expedition. Perhaps they alerted Spotswood to Blackbeard's location at Ocracoke, expecting to seize the pirate's treasure once he was eliminated. If so, they might have discovered that Blackbeard was more careful than they realised, that his treasure was hidden where they couldn't find it. This would explain why they didn't become obviously wealthy after Blackbeard's death. They expected to profit from his elimination, but found that the treasure was beyond their reach. The fourth possibility is that Blackbeard himself planned to betray Eden and Knight. Perhaps he was using them for temporary protection, while preparing to disappear with his wealth. Perhaps his treasure was hidden precisely to keep it from his corrupt partners, insurance against the day when they might decide he was more valuable dead than alive. If Blackbeard anticipated betrayal, he would have been careful to keep his treasure location secret from everyone, especially those who might have reason to take it from him. These possibilities are not mutually exclusive. The truth might involve elements of all of them, a complex web of betrayal and counter-betrayal that makes the fate of Blackbeard's treasure impossible to determine from historical records alone. But they suggest that the treasure mystery isn't just about where Blackbeard buried his gold. It's about who else might have known about it, who else might have wanted it, and what happened in the shadows of colonial politics where pirates and governors made their corrupt arrangements. The modern era of Blackbeard treasure hunting began in the early 20th century, when improved technology and growing popular interest in pirates combined to create a new wave of expeditions. Before this time, searching for Blackbeard's gold had been a matter of shovels and local legends, amateurs digging in spots that seemed promising without any systematic approach. The new generation of treasure hunters brought scientific methods, better equipment, and more sophisticated research to the challenge. One of the earliest serious efforts was conducted by a group of investors in the 1920s who hired a professional salvage company to search the waters around Ocracoke Island. They used the best diving equipment of the era, primitive by modern standards but revolutionary at the time. They surveyed the seafloor methodically, looking for anomalies that might indicate buried chests or sunken artifacts. They found nothing significant, but their effort established the pattern that future searches would follow. In the 1930s, the treasure hunter and historian Edward Rowe Snow conducted extensive research into Blackbeard's career and possible treasure locations. Snow was a careful scholar who combined archival research with fieldwork, visiting sites where Blackbeard was known to have operated and interviewing local residents who preserved oral traditions about the pirate. His books brought Blackbeard's story to a wide audience and inspired many future treasure hunters to take up the search. The mid-20th century saw the introduction of metal detectors to treasure hunting. These devices could locate buried metal objects without digging, making it possible to survey large areas quickly and identify promising targets for excavation. Metal detector enthusiasts combed the beaches and forests of coastal North Carolina, finding countless artifacts from various eras but no confirmed Blackbeard treasure. The limitations of early metal detectors were significant. They could only penetrate a few inches of soil, meaning that deeply buried treasure would go undetected. They couldn't distinguish between valuable metals and common iron, leading to many false positives, and they were useless underwater, where much of Blackbeard's treasure might be located. As technology improved, so did the sophistication of treasure hunting efforts. Ground-penetrating radar, developed for archaeological applications, could detect underground anomalies that might indicate burial sites. Magnetometers could locate concentrations of metal from greater distances. Side-scan sonar could map the seafloor in detail, identifying potential wreck sites for closer investigation. The 1990s brought the discovery of Queen Anne's Revenge, demonstrating that serious scientific archaeology could locate pirate artifacts that had been lost for centuries. This discovery energized the treasure hunting community, suggesting that other finds might be possible with the right combination of research and technology. The early 21st century has seen continued technological advancement. GPS allows treasure hunters to record and return to precise locations. Satellite imagery reveals landscape features invisible from ground level. Computer analysis can process historical records more efficiently than human researchers, identifying patterns and connections that might otherwise be missed. Yet for all this progress, Blackbeard's treasure remains unfound. The technology has improved enormously, but the fundamental challenge remains the same. We don't know where to look. Without specific information about where Blackbeard hid his gold, all the technology in the world can only narrow the search area, not pinpoint the target. The current state of Blackbeard treasure hunting is a mix of professional archaeology, amateur enthusiasm, and occasional fraudulent claims. Serious researchers continue to study historical records and conduct surveys using modern equipment. Amateur treasure hunters explore public lands with metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar, and periodically someone claims to have found Blackbeard's treasure, generating media attention before the claim is debunked or simply fades away without verification. The professional and amateur communities don't always get along. Archaeologists worry that amateur treasure hunters will damage historical sites or remove artifacts without proper documentation. Amateur treasure hunters complain that archaeologists are more interested in publishing papers than finding gold. Both groups are frustrated by laws that restrict treasure hunting on public lands and complicate ownership claims for anything that might be found. Despite these tensions, the search continues. Each year brings new expeditions, new theories, new technological applications. The fundamental appeal of the treasure hunt transcends generational and professional boundaries. Somewhere out there, Blackbeard's gold might still be waiting. The person who finds it will join a very exclusive club of treasure hunters who actually succeeded. That possibility draws people back to the North Carolina coast year after year, generation after generation. The specific locations where treasure hunters have focused their efforts tell us something about both the history and the psychology of the search for Blackbeard's gold. Each location has its own logic, its own evidence, and its own community of believers who are convinced that they've identified the right spot. Understanding these theories requires understanding what makes a good treasure hiding place and why Blackbeard might have chosen one location over another. Ocracoke Island remains the most popular theory, and for good reason. This is where Blackbeard died. This is where he made his last stand against Maynard's expedition. This is where he clearly felt comfortable enough to anchor his ship and spend time with a reduced crew. If Blackbeard buried treasure anywhere in North Carolina, Ocracoke would seem to be the obvious choice. The island offered several advantages for a pirate looking to hide valuables. It was relatively remote, accessible only by boat through inlets that were tricky to navigate without local knowledge. The sandy soil was easy to dig in, and the constantly shifting dunes would quickly hide any signs of excavation. The surrounding waters were shallow and dangerous, discouraging casual exploration by outsiders, and Blackbeard knew the area intimately, having used it as a base for the final months of his career. Treasure hunters have been searching Ocracoke for 3 centuries. Local legends describe mysterious lights on the beaches, ghostly figures appearing and disappearing, strange sounds in the night. These stories might be pure folklore, or they might be faded memories of actual events, treasure buried by torchlight generations ago. The legends have guided many searchers over the years. The problem with Ocracoke is that the landscape has changed dramatically since 1718. The barrier islands of the Outer Banks are constantly shifting, with sand moving in response to storms, currents, and sea level changes. An inlet that existed in Blackbeard's time might be closed now. A beach where he buried treasure might have eroded into the ocean. Landmarks he used to find his cache, distinctive trees or rock formations are long gone. Modern Ocracoke is also heavily developed compared to its 18th century state. Houses, hotels, and roads cover much of the island. Any treasure that was buried in what is now someone's backyard would have been discovered during construction or landscaping. The undeveloped areas, mostly dunes and marsh, have been searched repeatedly without success. Some treasure hunters have shifted their attention to the waters around Ocracoke rather than the island itself. Perhaps Blackbeard sank his treasure in a specific location, weighted down with rocks and marked by bearings from shore landmarks. This would explain why land searches have failed. The treasure isn't buried in sand, it's underwater, hidden in the murky waters of Pamlico Sound or the inlet channels. Underwater searches have been conducted but face significant challenges. Visibility in these waters is often poor, sometimes measured in inches rather than feet. The bottom is covered with silt that can hide objects completely. Currents move material around, meaning that something buried in one location might not stay there. And the area to be searched is enormous compared to what can be covered by divers or underwater vehicles. The Bath Town area is another major focus of treasure hunting activity. This was Blackbeard's home during his period of supposed retirement, the place where he married his final wife and maintained his relationship with the corrupt Governor Eden. If Blackbeard wanted a permanent treasure cache that he could access regularly, Bath would be the logical choice. The original town of Bath was small, just a few buildings clustered near the Pamlico River. Much of the surrounding area was undeveloped, offering numerous potential hiding places within easy reach of Blackbeard's residence. He could have walked or ridden a short distance from town, buried treasure in a secluded spot, and returned home without attracting attention. The challenge with Bath is that we don't know exactly where Blackbeard lived, or how he spent his time during this period. Historical records place him in the area, but don't provide detailed information about his daily activities. He might have had a favourite spot in the woods where he went to think or plan. He might have had a secret location where he met with contacts from his pirate life. Any of these places could have become a treasure hiding site. Local legends around Bath speak of Blackbeard's Point, a promontory on the Pamlico River where the pirate supposedly spent time contemplating his situation. Some versions of the legend claim that treasure is buried near this point, protected by the ghost of Blackbeard himself. The location has been searched without finding anything definitive, but the legend persists. Other Bath area legends focus on Plum Point, another riverside location associated with Blackbeard activity. According to some stories, Blackbeard was seen loading and unloading mysterious cargo at this point, possibly treasure being moved to or from a hiding place. The area has been extensively searched by treasure hunters using metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar. Some anomalies have been detected but not investigated due to private property restrictions or lack of funding for excavation. The town of Bath itself has yielded colonial-era artefacts during construction and archaeological work, but nothing that can be definitively connected to Blackbeard's treasure. Any significant cache hidden within the original town limits would likely have been discovered during 3 centuries of building, digging, and development. If treasure remains in the Bath area, it's probably in the surrounding countryside rather than the town itself. A third major theory places Blackbeard's treasure along the various rivers and creeks that flow through eastern North Carolina. The pirate was known to use these waterways to move goods and avoid detection by authorities operating on the open coast. A treasure cache along one of these inland waterways would be accessible by boat but hidden from casual observation. The Neuse River, the Pamlico River, the numerous creeks and tributaries that lace this region all offer potential hiding places. A chest buried on a riverbank or sunk in a deep hole could remain hidden indefinitely, especially if the landmarks used to find it were natural features that have since changed or disappeared. This theory has generated numerous searches along the waterways of eastern North Carolina. Some have focused on locations where historical records suggest Blackbeard might have stopped. Others have followed local legends about pirate activity, stories passed down through generations of coastal families. Still others have used geographic analysis to identify locations that would have been ideal for treasure hiding, spots that are secluded, accessible by water, and easy to find with the right directions. None of these searches has produced confirmed treasure, but they continue because the theory makes geographic sense. Blackbeard operated throughout this river system. He knew its channels and hiding places. If he buried treasure anywhere in North Carolina, the rivers and creeks would have been ideal locations. A more exotic theory places some of Blackbeard's treasure in Virginia rather than North Carolina. In the months before his death, Blackbeard was known to operate off the Virginia coast, and Governor Spotswood's concern about pirate activity in his waters was part of what motivated the expedition that killed him. Perhaps Blackbeard buried treasure during his Virginia operations, intending to retrieve it later from his North Carolina base. The Virginia coast offers similar advantages to the North Carolina shore: barrier islands, hidden inlets, shallow sounds where treasure could be buried or sunk. The area around Cape Charles and the entrance to Chesapeake Bay has attracted treasure hunters who believe Blackbeard might have cached valuables there. So far, nothing has been found. The challenge with the Virginia theory is that Blackbeard's presence there was transitory. He was raiding, not establishing a base. Burying treasure requires time and privacy, both of which would have been harder to find while conducting active pirate operations. It's possible that Blackbeard made quick caches during his Virginia raids, but more likely that any significant treasure went south with him to North Carolina. Still more exotic theories place Blackbeard's treasure in the Caribbean, buried during his earlier career before he moved operations northward. The Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, various locations throughout the West Indies all have their proponents and their legends. But these theories face the problem of distance. If Blackbeard buried treasure in the Caribbean, how would he retrieve it from North Carolina? The journey was dangerous, time-consuming, and would require explaining his absence to the authorities who were supposedly monitoring his reformed behaviour. The Caribbean theories tend to attract less serious attention than the North Carolina and Virginia theories. Most researchers believe that any significant treasure cache would be within reasonable distance of Blackbeard's final base, not thousands of miles away in waters he had left behind. But the Caribbean theories persist in popular imagination, fed by the romantic association between pirates and tropical islands. The reality of Blackbeard's treasure is probably more prosaic than any of these theories suggest. He operated for 2 years, capturing ships and accumulating wealth. He had expenses, bribes to pay, crews to maintain, supplies to purchase. The amount of treasure he actually retained might be much smaller than legends suggest, and wherever it is, 3 centuries of natural processes and human activity have probably scattered, corroded, or destroyed much of what was originally there. But treasure hunters aren't motivated by prosaic reality. They're motivated by the possibility, however slim, that somewhere out there is a cache of pirate gold that has been waiting 300 years to be discovered. That possibility keeps people searching, keeps people hoping, keeps the legend alive. The science of treasure hunting has advanced dramatically in recent decades, but Blackbeard's gold remains elusive. Understanding why requires understanding both what modern technology can do and what it cannot do, the capabilities and limitations of the tools that treasure hunters now have at their disposal. Metal detectors have been used in treasure hunting for over a century, and modern versions are far more sophisticated than their predecessors. Today's detectors can distinguish between different types of metal, identify targets at greater depths, and operate in conditions that would have defeated earlier equipment. A skilled operator with a high-end detector can locate small metal objects buried several feet below the surface. But metal detectors have fundamental limitations. They can only detect metal, not other valuables like gems or currency that might be part of a pirate treasure. They require the operator to pass directly over the target, meaning that large areas take enormous amounts of time to survey, and they generate false positives from natural mineral deposits, modern trash, and historical artifacts that have nothing to do with pirates. Searching for Blackbeard's treasure with a metal detector is like looking for a specific needle in a haystack the size of a small state. The North Carolina coast has been accumulating metal objects for 3 centuries. Every battlefield, every shipwreck, every colonial settlement, every modern development has left metal debris in the soil and sediment. A detector that beeps at every piece of metal would overwhelm the operator with false alarms. A detector tuned to ignore common metals might miss the silver or gold that treasure hunters are seeking. Ground-penetrating radar offers different capabilities. This technology sends electromagnetic pulses into the ground and measures the reflections, creating images of subsurface features. It can detect voids, disturbed soil, and objects that aren't necessarily metal. A buried chest, even one containing non-metallic valuables, would create an anomaly visible on GPR scans. The limitations of ground-penetrating radar include depth of penetration, which varies depending on soil composition and moisture content. Sandy soils like those found on the Outer Banks are relatively transparent to radar, allowing good penetration depth. But clay soils, common in the North Carolina interior, absorb radar energy and limit what can be seen. Wet soils and standing water also interfere with GPR performance. Interpreting GPR results requires expertise and experience. The images show anomalies, not identifications. A void that might be a buried chest could also be a root ball, a natural air pocket, or a modern utility conduit. Each anomaly must be investigated through excavation or additional testing, and most turn out to be false alarms. Magnetometers detect variations in the Earth's magnetic field caused by concentrations of magnetic materials. They are particularly useful for locating iron objects, including the iron fittings that would have been part of a treasure chest's construction. Marine magnetometers can survey large areas of seafloor relatively quickly, identifying potential targets for closer investigation. But magnetometers can't distinguish between a pirate's treasure chest and a car engine that was dumped in the water 50 years ago. The seafloor around the North Carolina coast is littered with magnetic debris from shipwrecks, lost anchors, and modern pollution. Each magnetic anomaly must be investigated individually, a time-consuming process that often yields disappointment. Side-scan sonar creates detailed images of the seafloor by bouncing sound waves off underwater features. It's excellent for locating shipwrecks and large objects, and it played a crucial role in the discovery of Queen Anne's Revenge. But side-scan sonar shows surface features, not buried objects. A treasure chest buried under sediment would be invisible to sonar. Advanced technologies continue to be developed and applied to treasure hunting challenges. LIDAR, which uses laser pulses to create detailed topographic maps, can reveal landscape features hidden by vegetation. Satellite imagery can show patterns invisible from ground level. DNA analysis might someday identify human remains associated with pirate activity. Computer algorithms can process historical records and identify patterns that human researchers might miss. Yet despite all this technology, Blackbeard's treasure remains unfound. The fundamental problem isn't technological capability, it's information. We don't know where to look. No amount of sophisticated equipment can compensate for the basic lack of guidance about where Blackbeard hid his gold. The technology can narrow the search area, eliminate certain possibilities, and make investigation of promising sites more efficient. But it cannot replace the specific knowledge that died with Blackbeard on the deck of the adventure. This limitation explains why treasure hunting remains partly an art rather than purely a science. Successful treasure hunters combine technological capabilities with historical research, psychological insight, and sometimes pure intuition. They study the evidence, develop theories about where treasure might be hidden, and then apply technology to test those theories. When a theory proves wrong, they revise their thinking and try again. The search for Blackbeard's treasure continues along these lines. Researchers study historical records for clues about his movements and associations. They analyze the landscape of coastal North Carolina, looking for locations that match their theories about where he would have hidden valuables. They apply various technologies to investigate promising sites, and so far, they have failed to find anything definitive. But the search goes on, driven by the same combination of hope and determination that has motivated treasure hunters for 3 centuries. The psychological dimension of treasure hunting deserves consideration, because it shapes both who searches for Blackbeard's gold and how they conduct their searches. Treasure hunting isn't just a practical activity. It's an obsession, a calling, something that takes hold of people and doesn't let go. Understanding this psychology helps explain why the search has continued for so long despite so little success. The lure of hidden treasure is ancient and powerful. It speaks to fundamental human desires, the wish to become wealthy without working, the hope that luck or destiny might transform ordinary life into something extraordinary, the thrill of discovery and the satisfaction of solving a puzzle. Blackbeard's treasure offers all of this in concentrated form. Whoever finds it will become not just rich, but famous, their name forever linked with one of history's most legendary pirates. This potential reward creates a willingness to accept enormous risk and invest enormous effort. Treasure hunters have spent fortunes searching for Blackbeard's gold. They have dedicated years or decades of their lives to the quest. They have damaged their health, strained their relationships, and sacrificed their financial security in pursuit of a prize that may not exist. By any rational calculation, the expected value of treasure hunting is negative. The probability of finding anything valuable is extremely low, and the costs of searching are very high. But treasure hunters aren't motivated by rational calculation. They're motivated by possibility. As long as there's a chance, however slim, they'll keep searching. The psychology of treasure hunting also involves a phenomenon that psychologists call intermittent reinforcement. This is the principle that unpredictable rewards are more motivating than predictable ones. A slot machine that pays off occasionally is more addictive than one that never pays or always pays. The uncertainty itself becomes compelling. Treasure hunting operates on the same principle. Every search has the potential to be the one that succeeds. Every piece of evidence, every anomaly detected by equipment, every local legend could be the clue that leads to discovery. The failures don't discourage treasure hunters. They motivate them. Each failure means the treasure is still out there, still waiting, still available to whoever persists long enough to find it. This psychology creates a community of treasure hunters who reinforce each other's beliefs and sustain each other's hope. They share stories of near misses and tantalizing clues. They debate theories about where Blackbeard might have hidden his gold. They criticize the methods of rival searchers while defending their own approaches. This community provides social support for an activity that outsiders often view as eccentric or foolish. The psychology also creates vulnerability to fraud and self-deception. People who desperately want to believe something are easily convinced by evidence that supports their beliefs. Con artists have exploited treasure hunters throughout history, selling fake maps, claiming inside knowledge, and collecting investment money for expeditions that were never serious attempts to find treasure. Even honest treasure hunters can deceive themselves, interpreting ambiguous evidence as confirmation of their theories, remembering hits and forgetting misses, seeing patterns that don't actually exist. The line between enthusiastic treasure hunter and self-deluded obsessive can be difficult to draw. Many of the most persistent searchers for Blackbeard's treasure have exhibited behaviors that suggest their quest has become unhealthy. They've isolated themselves from family and friends who don't share their obsession. They've spent money they couldn't afford. They've made plans that depend on finding treasure, as if discovery were a certainty rather than a remote possibility. These observations aren't meant to disparage treasure hunters or dismiss their efforts. The search for Blackbeard's gold has produced genuine historical knowledge, recovered real artifacts, and contributed to our understanding of the colonial period. Even unsuccessful searches have value if they're conducted responsibly and documented properly. And the romance of treasure hunting, the dream of discovering something that has been lost for centuries, is a legitimate human motivation that doesn't require rational justification. But understanding the psychology helps explain why the search has continued so long, and why it will probably continue for generations to come. Blackbeard's treasure might be real or imaginary, findable or lost forever. Either way, people will keep looking. The psychology of treasure hunting guarantees it. The legal and ethical dimensions of treasure hunting add complexity to the search for Blackbeard's gold. Who owns treasure that has been buried for 300 years? What obligations do treasure hunters have to report their findings? How should conflicts between private treasure seekers and public archaeological interests be resolved? These questions don't have simple answers. Treasure found on private land generally belongs to the landowner, not the person who finds it. This means that treasure hunters searching private property either need the owner's permission or risk both legal penalties and losing any claim to what they find. Getting permission often requires sharing potential rewards, reducing the treasure hunter's incentive to search. Treasure found on public land is more complicated. Different laws apply to federal, state, and local public lands, and the rules vary depending on the type of land and the nature of what is found. National parks and historic sites generally prohibit treasure hunting entirely. Other public lands may allow metal detecting but require permits and reporting of significant fines. Marine treasure is governed by entirely different legal frameworks. The law of salvage, which dates back centuries, gives salvors rights to property recovered from the sea, but these rights are limited by environmental regulations, archaeological protection laws, and competing claims from governments that assert sovereignty over their territorial waters. The discovery of Queen Anne's Revenge illustrates the legal complexity. The wreck was found in North Carolina waters by a private company, Intersal Incorporated, which claimed salvage rights. The state of North Carolina also claimed ownership as the successor to the colonial government that had jurisdiction when the ship sank. Years of litigation followed before the parties reached a settlement that gave the state ownership of artifacts, while compensating Intersal for its discovery and recovery work. Similar disputes would likely arise if Blackbeard's treasure were found. The state of North Carolina would probably claim ownership, arguing that treasure hidden by a pirate operating illegally in colonial waters belongs to the public. Private landowners might claim that anything found on their property is theirs. Descendants of Blackbeard's victims might argue that the treasure was stolen from their ancestors and should be returned. The federal government might intervene if the treasure were found on federal land or in federal waters. These legal uncertainties create practical problems for treasure hunters. They can't be sure they'll be able to keep what they find, which reduces the incentive to search. They have to balance the potential for discovery against the potential for legal battles that might consume any profit. And they have to decide whether to search openly, risking competition from others who learn of their interest, or secretly, risking legal penalties if they're caught. The ethical dimensions are equally complex. Archaeological sites contain information that is destroyed by improper excavation. A treasure hunter who digs up artifacts without proper documentation is destroying historical evidence that can never be recovered. Professional archaeologists argue that pirate sites should be excavated scientifically, not looted by profit seekers. But professional archaeology is slow and underfunded. Sites that could be excavated by treasure hunters might wait decades for proper archaeological attention. In the meantime, natural processes and human development might destroy them entirely. Is it better to let amateurs recover artifacts improperly than to let them be lost forever? There's no consensus on this question. The relationship between treasure hunters and archaeologists has often been adversarial. Treasure hunters accuse archaeologists of being more interested in publishing papers than finding treasure. Archaeologists accuse treasure hunters of being greedy amateurs who destroy irreplaceable evidence. Both sides have legitimate points, but neither side is entirely right. Some treasure hunters are careful, responsible people who document their work and share their findings with researchers. Some archaeologists are open to collaboration with private searchers, but the tensions remain. The search for Blackbeard's treasure operates within this complicated legal and ethical landscape. Anyone who finds the treasure will face questions about ownership, documentation, and responsibility. The answers to those questions will determine not just who profits from the discovery, but how much historical knowledge is preserved or lost. The legends and folklore surrounding Blackbeard have evolved continuously since his death, becoming more elaborate with each generation. These stories serve purposes beyond simple entertainment. They preserve cultural memory, shape how we understand history, and influence the ongoing search for his treasure. Examining these legends reveals as much about the people who tell them as about the pirate himself. The most persistent legend is that of Blackbeard's ghost. According to countless accounts spanning 3 centuries, the pirate's spirit has been seen along the North Carolina coast, particularly around Ocracoke and Bath. He appears as a headless figure, wandering the beaches or sailing a phantom ship across the water. Sometimes he carries a lantern, as if searching for something. Sometimes he simply stands and stares, his missing head a reminder of how his life ended. These ghost stories have been reported by people from all walks of life. Fishermen have seen lights moving along beaches where no one should be walking. Tourists have photographed mysterious figures that weren't visible to the naked eye. Local residents have heard unexplained sounds at night, footsteps and voices and the creaking of ships' rigging. Whether these experiences reflect genuine supernatural activity or the power of suggestion operating on people who know the legends, they've become part of the cultural landscape of coastal North Carolina. The ghost stories serve a practical function for the treasure hunting community. They suggest that Blackbeard remains connected to his earthly possessions, that his spirit continues to guard whatever he left behind. This adds romantic appeal to the treasure hunt and helps explain why the treasure has never been found. It's protected not just by physical concealment, but by supernatural forces that must be overcome or appeased. Some treasure hunters have actually attempted to communicate with Blackbeard's ghost, hoping to learn the location of his treasure through paranormal means. Seances, Ouija boards, and psychic mediums have all been employed in the search. None of these methods has produced verifiable results, but they demonstrate the willingness of treasure hunters to try unconventional approaches when conventional ones have failed. Another legendary element is the connection between Blackbeard and the devil. Stories have circulated since shortly after his death that Blackbeard had made a deal with Satan, trading his soul for supernatural powers that made him nearly invincible in battle. The evidence cited for this claim includes his fearsome appearance, his apparent immunity to wounds that would have killed ordinary men, and his own statements suggesting he had dark supernatural connections. The devil legend expanded over time to include claims that Satan helped Blackbeard hide his treasure and continues to protect it. According to some versions, the treasure is literally guarded by demonic forces that will destroy anyone who comes too close. Other versions suggest that only someone with special spiritual qualities, someone who can resist or negotiate with these forces, will ever be able to claim the gold. These religious or quasi-religious elements reflect the cultural context in which the legends developed. Early American society was deeply religious, and explanations for unusual events often involved supernatural forces. A pirate as successful and frightening as Blackbeard seemed to require more than natural explanation. The devil provided that explanation, placing Blackbeard within a cosmic framework of good versus evil. The legend of Blackbeard's 14 wives has also grown over time. Historical evidence suggests he was married at least once, to a woman in Bath, but the claim of 14 wives appears to be exaggeration or invention. The number 14 may have been chosen because it sounds impressive while still being plausible, or it may have originated from confusion between different women Blackbeard was associated with during his career. The 14 Wives legend has been elaborated to include stories of buried treasure associated with each marriage. According to some versions, Blackbeard gave each wife a piece of a map that, when combined, reveals the location of his main treasure cache. Other versions claim that he buried separate treasures at locations connected to each wife, creating 14 separate caches that must be found and combined. There's no historical evidence for any of these stories. They appear to be inventions designed to add romance and complexity to the basic treasure legend, but they've been taken seriously by some treasure hunters who have tried to identify Blackbeard's various marriages and search locations associated with each one. The legend of Blackbeard's crew also deserves examination. According to some stories, members of his crew escaped the Battle at Ocracoke with significant treasure, scattering to various locations where they buried their shares. These subordinate caches are supposedly still hidden along the Atlantic coast, from the Caribbean to New England. Each region has its own local legends about pirates who might have been Blackbeard's men, hiding their plunder after their captain's death. These crew legends have generated numerous treasure hunts separate from the main search for Blackbeard's personal fortune. They suggest that even if Blackbeard's main cache is never found, pieces of his wealth might be recovered from the hiding places of his followers. Each successful recovery of any pirate treasure is interpreted as potential confirmation of these legends. The evolution of Blackbeard legends shows how folklore adapts to changing circumstances and needs. Early versions of the stories emphasized moral lessons. Piracy doesn't pay, evil is punished, the devil collects his due. Later versions emphasized adventure and romance, presenting Blackbeard as a colorful anti-hero rather than a straightforward villain. Modern versions often incorporate contemporary interests, connecting Blackbeard to conspiracy theories, paranormal phenomena, and alternative history. The legends also show geographical variation. Stories told in North Carolina emphasize locations there, particularly Ocracoke and Bath. Stories told in Virginia emphasize Blackbeard's activities in that colony, and Governor Spotswood's heroic efforts to eliminate him. Stories told in the Caribbean connect Blackbeard to the broader pirate world of the West Indies. Each region claims special connection to the famous pirate and special knowledge about his treasure. This geographical competition has sometimes generated conflict between treasure hunting communities in different areas. North Carolina searchers dismiss Virginia theories as wishful thinking, based on that state's desire to claim a piece of the Blackbeard legend. Virginia searchers respond that North Carolina has been searched so thoroughly that any remaining treasure must be elsewhere. Each community defends its theories while attacking alternatives. The academic study of Blackbeard legends is itself a growing field. Folklorists analyze the structure and transmission of the stories, tracing how they've changed over time and what those changes reveal about the societies that told them. Historians try to separate legendary elements from historical facts, constructing the most accurate possible picture of who Blackbeard actually was. Archaeologists examine physical evidence to test legendary claims against material reality. This scholarly attention has added new dimensions to the treasure hunt. Modern searchers can draw on academic research that wasn't available to their predecessors. They can evaluate legendary claims more critically, distinguishing between stories that might preserve real information and stories that are clearly invented. They can apply insights from folklore studies to understand why certain stories have persisted while others have faded. But scholarship also threatens the treasure hunting enterprise by exposing the weakness of evidence that many searchers rely upon. When a folklorist demonstrates that a particular legend has no basis in contemporary sources, that legend becomes less useful as a guide to treasure hunting. When a historian shows that Blackbeard probably wasn't as wealthy as legends suggest, the motivation to search for his treasure decreases. The tension between scholarly analysis and treasure hunting hope continues to shape the field. The legends of Blackbeard will continue to evolve as long as people tell them. New stories will be invented, old stories will be modified, and the relationship between legend and history will remain complicated. The treasure hunt will continue as well, driven partly by historical evidence and partly by legendary beliefs that can neither be confirmed nor completely debunked. Somewhere in this mixture of fact and folklore lies the truth about Blackbeard's missing fortune. Finding that truth requires engaging with both the historical record and the legendary tradition, neither accepting legends uncritically, nor dismissing them entirely. The role of popular culture in shaping public perception of Blackbeard cannot be overstated. From the earliest printed accounts of his career to the most recent Hollywood blockbusters, Blackbeard has been a fixture of entertainment media. This attention has kept his legend alive but has also distorted it, creating a version of Blackbeard that has little connection to historical reality. The first popular accounts of Blackbeard appeared within months of his death, a pamphlet titled A General History of the Pirates, attributed to a Captain Charles Johnson but possibly written by Daniel Defoe, devoted substantial space to Blackbeard's career. This account mixed genuine information with embellishment and invention, establishing the template that future depictions would follow. The smoking beard, the multiple pistols, the claims of demonic connection, all appeared in this early publication. Subsequent centuries produced countless novels, plays, and stories featuring Blackbeard as a character. He appeared in romantic adventures where handsome heroes battled his fearsome crew. He appeared in morality tales where his evil was punished and his victims avenged. He appeared in comedies where his terrifying reputation was played for laughs. Each appearance added new elements to his legend while reinforcing the basic image established in the earliest accounts. The 20th century brought Blackbeard to new media. He became a character in films, starting with silent movies and continuing through the golden age of Hollywood pirate pictures. Actors portrayed him with varying degrees of historical accuracy, some emphasizing his intelligence and leadership, others playing him as a simple brute. The visual image of Blackbeard that most people carry in their minds comes from these film portrayals rather than from historical sources. Television brought Blackbeard to even wider audiences. Documentary programs explored his historical career, treasure hunting shows featured searches for his gold, and dramatic series included him as a character in fictionalized pirate adventures. Each production introduced Blackbeard to new generations of viewers, ensuring that his name remained familiar even as detailed knowledge of his actual life faded. Video games, comic books, and internet content have continued the trend. Blackbeard appears as a character in pirate-themed games, as a villain in adventure comics, and as the subject of countless websites and social media posts. The quantity of Blackbeard content available to modern audiences far exceeds what any previous generation could access. This mass media attention has complicated the treasure hunt in various ways. It has created enormous public interest in Blackbeard, ensuring a ready audience for any discovery related to his treasure. It has also spread misinformation, as fictional elements become confused with historical facts in the public mind. Claims that appear in movies or novels are sometimes repeated as if they were documented history. The treasure hunt itself has become entertainment content. Reality television shows have featured expeditions searching for Blackbeard's gold, complete with dramatic music, cliffhanger editing, and conflict among team members. These shows generate ratings by maximizing drama, which may or may not align with genuine archaeological investigation. Critics argue that treasure hunting television prioritizes entertainment over accuracy, spreading misconceptions and encouraging irresponsible excavation practices. But the shows also raise awareness of Blackbeard's treasure and attract funding and participants to the search. Popular culture has also influenced the locations where treasure hunters search. Sites that have been featured in films or television shows attract more attention than equally promising sites that haven't received media coverage. The association between a location and popular media creates a kind of legitimacy, suggesting that professionals have already evaluated the site and found it worth featuring. This media-driven attention can be counterproductive if it focuses efforts on locations that are actually less likely to contain treasure, but it can also be helpful if media exposure brings resources and expertise to promising sites that might otherwise be overlooked. The overall effect of popular culture on the Blackbeard treasure hunt is ambiguous. Media attention keeps the legend alive and generates interest in searching. But it also distorts the historical record, spreads misinformation, and sometimes directs attention away from the most promising avenues of investigation. Treasure hunters must navigate this media landscape, taking advantage of public interest while trying to maintain accuracy and integrity. The future of the search for Blackbeard's treasure will be shaped by forces that we can only partially anticipate. Technological advancement will continue, offering new tools for investigation. Climate change will alter the landscape where treasure might be hidden. Economic and social conditions will affect the resources available for searching. Legal and regulatory changes will create new opportunities and new obstacles. Each of these forces deserves consideration as we think about what comes next. Technological advancement has been transforming treasure hunting throughout its history, and this transformation will continue. Artificial intelligence and machine learning offer possibilities that are just beginning to be explored. These technologies could analyze vast amounts of historical data, identifying patterns that human researchers have missed. They could process sensor data more efficiently, finding anomalies that might indicate buried treasure. They could even generate new theories about where Blackbeard might have hidden his gold, based on analysis of his known behavior and preferences. Underwater technology will also continue to advance. Autonomous underwater vehicles can survey large areas more efficiently than human divers. Advanced sonar and imaging systems can detect smaller objects at greater depths. Excavation robots can work in conditions too dangerous for humans. These tools will make underwater treasure hunting more feasible, potentially opening up areas that have been impractical to search with current technology. Genetic and chemical analysis technologies might also contribute to future searches. Trace evidence from Blackbeard's time might be identifiable through DNA analysis. Chemical signatures in soil or sediment might indicate where metal objects have corroded over centuries. These forensic approaches could provide new clues that physical surveys alone cannot reveal. But technological advancement cuts both ways. Better detection technology means that treasure that has survived 3 centuries of searching might finally be found. It also means that anything found will be more thoroughly documented, reducing opportunities for private treasure hunters to keep discoveries secret. The same technologies that help find treasure also help track and regulate treasure hunting activities. Climate change is already affecting the North Carolina coast, where most Blackbeard treasure hunting occurs. Sea levels are rising, flooding areas that were dry land in the 18th century. Storm patterns are changing, with more intense hurricanes reshaping barrier islands and coastal features. Erosion is accelerating, moving the coastline inland and exposing materials that have been buried for centuries. These changes create both risks and opportunities for treasure hunters. Rising seas might flood treasure sites, making them harder to access. But erosion might also expose buried materials that have been hidden since Blackbeard's time. Storm damage might destroy treasure caches or reveal them. The dynamic coastal environment adds urgency to the search, as treasure that survives today might be destroyed or rendered inaccessible by future climate change. Economic conditions will influence the resources available for treasure hunting. During prosperous times, more funding is available for expeditions, and more people have leisure time to pursue treasure hunting as a hobby. During recessions, treasure hunting might become more attractive as a potential path to wealth, but resources for systematic searching become scarcer. The economics of treasure hunting fluctuate with the broader economy. The value of any treasure found is also subject to economic forces. Gold and silver prices fluctuate based on market conditions. The historical and cultural value of pirate artifacts depends on collector interest, which changes over time. A treasure that would be worth millions today might be worth more or less in future decades, depending on economic and cultural trends. Legal and regulatory changes will create new rules for treasure hunting. Environmental regulations increasingly restrict activities that might disturb protected ecosystems or archaeological sites. Property law continues to evolve, affecting who owns treasure that is found on different types of land or in different bodies of water. International agreements influence treasure hunting in coastal waters that multiple nations might claim. These legal changes generally restrict treasure hunting rather than enabling it. The trend over recent decades has been toward more protection for archaeological sites and more regulation of private treasure hunting. This trend seems likely to continue, potentially making future searches more difficult than past ones. Social and cultural changes will affect who searches for Blackbeard's treasure and why. Younger generations have different relationships with history than their predecessors. The romantic image of pirates that motivated earlier treasure hunters may seem dated or problematic to future searchers. Alternative motivations, including environmental awareness, social justice concerns, and different forms of historical interest, may shape how treasure hunting is conducted and perceived. Despite all these changes, the fundamental appeal of treasure hunting will likely persist. The dream of finding lost wealth is deeply rooted in human psychology. As long as Blackbeard's treasure remains unfound, people will keep looking for it. The methods and motivations may change, but the search will continue. The night has grown long, and we have travelled together through centuries of history and legend. We have followed Blackbeard from his mysterious origins through his brief, spectacular career to his violent death on a November morning in 1718. We have examined the evidence for his missing treasure, the theories about where it might be hidden, and the efforts that have been made to find it. We have considered curses and ghosts, technology and psychology, law and legend, and still, the fundamental question remains unanswered. Where is Blackbeard's treasure? The honest answer is that we don't know. We may never know. The treasure might be exactly where Blackbeard left it, buried in sand or sunk in murky water, waiting for someone to find it with the right combination of information and luck. Or it might be long gone, spent or stolen or scattered so completely that nothing remains to be found. The uncertainty is part of what makes the mystery so compelling. But let's engage in one final speculation before we close. If Blackbeard did bury significant treasure, and if that treasure still exists, what would it look like? Based on what we know about pirate practices and the economics of the colonial era, we can make some educated guesses. The treasure would probably include Spanish coins, pieces of 8 doubloons minted from New World silver and gold. These were the standard currency of the Atlantic trade, and any pirate would have accumulated large quantities of them. After 3 centuries buried or submerged, the coins would be corroded and encrusted, but still identifiable to trained eyes. There might also be gold and silver bars, ingots stamped with mint marks from various colonial sources. These were easier to transport in bulk than loose coins, and were commonly found in the cargoes that pirates captured. The bars would be heavy and valuable, requiring substantial effort to move but rewarding that effort handsomely. Jewellery would likely be part of any major treasure cache. Pirates captured wealthy passengers who wore their wealth in the form of rings, necklaces, and other personal ornaments. These items would be highly variable in quality and style, reflecting the diverse origins of their original owners. Some would be gold and precious stones, others would be silver or brass, valuable at the time but perhaps disappointing to modern treasure hunters expecting chests full of diamonds. There might be religious artifacts, particularly if Blackbeard captured ships carrying church property. Crosses, chalices, and other sacred objects made from precious metals were common in colonial trade. These would have both material and historical value, connecting any discovery to the religious life of the colonial era. Trade goods like silk, spices, and ivory would not have survived 3 centuries of burial. Any such materials in Blackbeard's treasure are long gone, decomposed or consumed by natural processes. Only the durable metals and stones remain, a fraction of the original wealth but still potentially worth millions. The container itself would be significant. Pirates typically used wooden chests bound with iron, sturdy enough to protect their contents from damage. After 3 centuries, the wood would be largely decayed, but the iron fittings might survive, helping archaeologists understand how the treasure was originally stored and transported. Finding such a treasure would be a life-changing event for the discoverer. Legal battles over ownership might consume years and millions in legal fees. Academic researchers would want access to document and study every artifact. The media would descend, turning the finder into a celebrity whether they wanted the attention or not. The practical challenges of discovery might rival the challenges of searching, but none of these considerations diminish the romance of the possibility. Somewhere out there, maybe, Blackbeard's gold still waits. The same gold that he accumulated through 2 years of terror on the Atlantic. The same gold that made him one of the wealthiest pirates in history. The same gold that vanished when Maynard's sword found its mark and Blackbeard's secrets died with him. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, let that image settle in your mind. A treasure buried in darkness, patient and eternal, keeping its secrets through century after century. The pirate who hid it is long dead, his bones scattered, his head lost to history. But his gold, if it exists, endures. Gold doesn't rust, doesn't rot, doesn't decay. It waits, unchanged and unchanging, for someone to finally discover it. Perhaps that someone is already alive. Perhaps they're already searching, following a theory that will eventually lead them to the right location. Perhaps they'll use technology that hasn't been invented yet, or find evidence in archives that haven't been properly examined, or simply be in the right place at the right time through pure luck. Perhaps the treasure will be found in our lifetime, or perhaps it will keep its secrets forever. Perhaps the gold has already been found by someone who never reported the discovery, quietly converting it to wealth that their descendants enjoy without knowing its origin. Perhaps it was destroyed by some natural disaster that we'll never know about. Perhaps it was never as substantial as the legends suggest, and the missing treasure is mostly missing because it never existed in the first place. These uncertainties are not frustrating. They're the essence of the mystery. They're what makes the story of Blackbeard's treasure compelling after 300 years. They're why people keep searching, keep hoping, keep dreaming of being the one who finally solves the puzzle. The treasure of Blackbeard, the devil's gold, a fortune accumulated through violence and terror, hidden by a man who made himself into a demon, protected perhaps by forces that we don't fully understand, still out there, somewhere, waiting in darkness for the one who will finally be clever enough, or lucky enough, or cursed enough, to find it. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the mystery of Blackbeard's missing fortune. If you enjoyed this exploration, you might want to subscribe so you don't miss the next voyage into forgotten history. If you have theories about where the treasure might be hidden, or stories about Blackbeard from your own part of the world, leave a comment. I read them all, and sometimes the most interesting insights come from people who are hearing these stories for the first time. And if you found yourself drifting towards sleep during this long journey through pirate history and legend, that's exactly what these stories are for. Rest well. Dream of gold and islands and secrets that have waited centuries to be revealed. The treasure will still be there when you wake. It always is. Good night. Before we reach our conclusion, there are stories within the story that deserve their own telling. The individuals who have dedicated their lives to searching for Blackbeard's treasure form a community of dreamers, obsessives, and true believers whose experiences illuminate both the allure and the danger of treasure hunting. Their stories are as fascinating as the pirate legend itself. Consider the case of a man we'll call William, who spent 30 years searching for Blackbeard's gold in the waters around Ocracoke. He started as a successful businessman, comfortable and secure, but something about the treasure legend captured his imagination and wouldn't let go. He sold his business, invested everything in equipment and expeditions, and dedicated the rest of his life to the search. His wife left him after 5 years, unable to compete with his obsession. His children grew up barely knowing their father, who was always planning the next expedition or recovering from the last one. His health deteriorated from years of diving in cold, murky water, but he kept going. He was convinced, absolutely convinced, that he knew where the treasure was hidden. Year after year, his searches found nothing. Each failure was explained away as a minor setback, a temporary obstacle that would be overcome in the next expedition. He reinterpreted his evidence, adjusted his theories, and continued. To outsiders, his persistence looked like madness. To fellow treasure hunters, it was simply dedication, the kind of single-minded focus that any great discovery requires. He died without finding the treasure, but he never stopped believing it was there. His final words, according to family members, were about the search, about clues he thought he'd finally understood, and expeditions he would have undertaken if he'd had more time. Whether you see his story as tragedy or inspiration depends on your own relationship with dreams and obsession, or consider the story of a group of friends who formed a treasure hunting club in the 1970s. They were amateur history enthusiasts, intrigued by local legends about Blackbeard and curious whether modern technology could succeed where earlier searches had failed. They pooled resources to buy metal detecting equipment and spent weekends combing beaches and fields throughout coastal North Carolina. For the first few years, the treasure hunt was a hobby, something they did for fun while enjoying the outdoors and each other's company. They found colonial-era artifacts, Civil War relics, and countless pieces of modern junk. Each find generated excitement, even when it clearly had nothing to do with pirates. The act of searching was satisfying in itself, but gradually the hobby became something more serious. Some members dropped out, finding other interests or concluding that the treasure probably didn't exist. Those who remained became more committed, investing more time and money, sacrificing other activities and relationships for the search. The social club transformed into something closer to a cult, with shared beliefs that outsiders found increasingly difficult to understand. The group eventually split over disagreements about where to search and how to interpret evidence. Former friends became bitter rivals, each faction convinced that the other was searching in the wrong place. The treasure that was supposed to bring them wealth instead destroyed their relationships. Decades later, surviving members still pursue their separate searches, still believe they know where the gold is hidden, still refuse to share information with the people they once called friends. These individual stories repeat with variations throughout the treasure hunting community. The treasure becomes a relationship, demanding loyalty and sacrifice, promising rewards that somehow never quite materialize. Searchers develop emotional attachments to their theories, defending them against evidence and criticism with the same passion they would defend a loved one. The search itself becomes the purpose, more important than actually finding anything. Mental health professionals have noted patterns in treasure hunting behavior that resemble other forms of addiction and obsession. The intermittent reinforcement of occasional minor finds creates psychological dependence similar to gambling. The social isolation that often accompanies intense searching resembles patterns seen in other obsessive behaviors. The inability to stop despite negative consequences meets clinical criteria for addictive behavior. But pathologizing treasure hunting misses something important about the human need for mystery and adventure. Modern life offers few opportunities for the kind of quest that treasure hunting represents. We work at jobs that rarely inspire passion, live in environments designed for convenience rather than wonder, follow routines that prioritize efficiency over excitement. Treasure hunting offers an escape from all of this, a chance to engage with history, nature, and possibility in ways that ordinary life doesn't provide. The people who search for Blackbeard's treasure are participating in a tradition that goes back to the beginning of human history. Every culture has stories about hidden wealth waiting to be discovered by the worthy or the lucky. These stories serve psychological and social functions that transcend their literal content. They give us something to hope for, something to work toward, something to organize our dreams around. If Blackbeard's treasure is ever found, the discovery will be anticlimactic in some ways. The gold and silver will be counted, the artifacts will be catalogued, the legal battles will be fought. The mystery that has sustained imaginations for 3 centuries will be resolved, replaced by the mundane reality of dollars and courtrooms and museum displays. The romance of the unknown will be gone, and those who spent their lives searching will have to find something else to dream about. Perhaps that's why some treasure hunters secretly hope the treasure is never found. The searching is more satisfying than any discovery could be. The possibility of treasure is more valuable than the treasure itself. The dream is better than any reality could match. Let that thought accompany you as we continue to explore the deeper meanings of this ancient mystery. The landscape of coastal North Carolina where Blackbeard operated has its own story to tell, a story of geological change and ecological transformation that affects how we think about hidden treasure. The coast that exists today is dramatically different from the coast that Blackbeard knew. and understanding these changes is essential for any serious treasure hunter. The Outer Banks are barrier islands, thin strips of sand that separate the Atlantic Ocean from the sounds and estuaries of the mainland. These islands are not permanent fixtures but dynamic landforms that constantly move in response to waves, currents, storms, and sea level changes. Over centuries and millennia, barrier islands migrate, build up, erode away, and reform in different configurations. The Outer Banks that Blackbeard knew in the early 18th century were different from the Outer Banks of today. Inlets that he used to enter the sounds have closed, filled with sand by natural processes. New inlets have opened, cutting through the islands in places that didn't exist in his time. The shape of individual islands has changed as sand has moved from one location to another. Landmarks that might have guided him to hidden treasure have disappeared or been transformed beyond recognition. Ocracoke Inlet, where Blackbeard made his final stand, is a good example of this dynamism. The inlet has been continuously used since colonial times, but its exact location and configuration have changed repeatedly. The channel that ships follow today is not the same channel that existed in 1718. The shoreline where Blackbeard anchored his ship has moved, eroded or built up by the relentless action of water and wind. If Blackbeard buried treasure on or near Ocracoke Inlet, that treasure might now be underwater as the shoreline has retreated. It might be buried under new layers of sand deposited by storms. It might be in a location that bears no resemblance to what Blackbeard saw when he chose his hiding place. The landmarks he used to find it, distinctive dunes or vegetation patterns, are long gone. Similar changes have affected every potential treasure location along the North Carolina coast. Bath, which was on the waterfront in colonial times, is now some distance from the river due to changes in the shoreline and drainage patterns. The sounds and rivers have shifted their channels, filled in some areas while deepening others. Forests have grown up in places that were open fields, while other areas have been cleared and developed. These geological changes don't make treasure hunting impossible, but they make it much more difficult. A treasure hunter can't simply follow directions from the colonial era and expect to find anything. They have to reconstruct what the landscape looked like 300 years ago and figure out where historical locations correspond to modern geography. This requires collaboration between treasure hunters and geologists, combining technical knowledge of coastal processes with historical research about past conditions. Some treasure hunters have embraced this interdisciplinary approach, working with scientists to map historical shorelines and reconstruct past landscapes. They use geological surveys, historical maps, and archaeological evidence to understand how the coast has changed over time. This work has produced valuable insights even when it hasn't led to treasure discoveries. Other treasure hunters ignore geological considerations, preferring to follow legends and hunches without worrying about scientific details. These searchers often dig in places that make sense on modern maps, but couldn't have been hiding places in the 18th century. Their failures reinforce the importance of understanding landscape change. Climate change is accelerating the transformation of the North Carolina coast. Sea levels are rising faster than at any time in recorded history, flooding low-lying areas and intensifying erosion. Storm intensity appears to be increasing, with more powerful hurricanes reshaping the barrier islands more dramatically than in the past. The coast that treasure hunters search today may be significantly different from the coast they'll search in 50 or 100 years. These changes create urgency for the treasure hunt. Materials that have survived 3 centuries of burial might be exposed by erosion, discovered by accident, or lost forever to rising seas. The window of opportunity for finding Blackbeard's treasure may be closing, as the landscape that conceals it is transformed. The natural environment of the treasure hunting area also affects search strategies. The waters where underwater searches are conducted have poor visibility due to sediment suspended in the water column. Divers often can't see more than a few feet, sometimes only a few inches. This makes visual surveys nearly impossible, and requires reliance on instruments that can detect targets without seeing them. The bottom of the sounds and rivers is covered with soft sediment that can bury objects and obscure them from detection. A treasure chest that sank in the 18th century would be covered by layers of mud and sand, invisible to sonar and difficult to detect even with magnetometers. Excavating underwater in these conditions is challenging and expensive, requiring specialized equipment and techniques. The vegetation on land also complicates searches. Forests that didn't exist in Blackbeard's time now cover potential treasure sites. Root systems penetrate deep into the soil, disturbing any buried materials and creating confusion for detection equipment. Clearing vegetation for searches is usually prohibited on protected lands and expensive on private property. These environmental factors don't prove that Blackbeard's treasure can't be found. They simply illustrate the magnitude of the challenge facing treasure hunters. The treasure isn't just hidden by the pirate who buried it. It's hidden by 3 centuries of natural processes that have transformed the landscape beyond recognition. Finding it will require understanding these processes and somehow compensating for the changes they've caused. The waters of Pamlico Sound deserve special attention as a potential location for Blackbeard's treasure. This large body of water, sheltered behind the barrier islands of the Outer Banks, was Blackbeard's primary operating area during his North Carolina period. He knew its channels and shallows intimately, used it to escape pursuers who didn't share his local knowledge, and may have used it to hide treasure that couldn't be kept on shore. Pamlico Sound covers about 1,500 square miles, making it one of the largest lagoons in the United States. The water is shallow, averaging only about 5 feet deep, with a bottom of soft mud and sand that can conceal objects indefinitely. Visibility is typically poor, ranging from a few feet in good conditions to near zero when sediment is disturbed. Currents are complex, influenced by wind, tides, and the flow of rivers that empty into the sound. These conditions make systematic searching extremely difficult. A diver or underwater vehicle can only survey a tiny fraction of the sound's area in any practical time frame. Detection equipment must penetrate both water and sediment to find buried objects. Any anomaly that is detected must be excavated in conditions that make careful work nearly impossible. Yet the sound remains a prime candidate for Blackbeard treasure because it offers advantages that would have appealed to a pirate looking to hide valuables. Treasure sunk in the sound would be accessible only by boat, limiting who could retrieve it. The murky water would conceal any disturbance from prying eyes. The soft bottom would allow relatively easy burial and concealment, and Blackbeard's intimate knowledge of the sound would let him find a specific location even without obvious surface markers. Several theories have proposed specific locations within Pamlico Sound where Blackbeard might have sunk treasure. Some focus on deep holes in the otherwise shallow sound, natural depressions where the bottom drops to unusual depths. These holes would be memorable landmarks that Blackbeard could find reliably, and they would make treasure harder to discover by accident. Others focus on areas near the mouths of rivers, where Blackbeard is known to have operated. The confluence of river and sound water creates complex bottom topography that might include natural hiding places. Historical accounts suggest Blackbeard used several rivers for various purposes, and any of them might have been used to cache treasure. Still others focus on areas near specific islands or points along the shoreline. These locations could be identified from the water using visual landmarks, making them easier to find and return to. The combination of underwater concealment and above-water reference points would provide security without sacrificing accessibility. No systematic survey of Pamlico Sound for Blackbeard treasure has ever been conducted. The scale of such an undertaking would be enormous, requiring technology, time, and funding that have never been available. Individual searchers have explored small areas of the sound without significant discoveries, but the vast majority of the bottom has never been examined. This lack of systematic searching means that our conclusions about Pamlico Sound are based on speculation rather than evidence. The treasure might be there, might not be there, and we simply don't know. The sound keeps its secrets as effectively as any other potential hiding place. Future technology might make comprehensive surveying of Pamlico Sound feasible. Autonomous underwater vehicles could methodically scan the bottom, building detailed maps that reveal any anomalies worth investigating. Advanced sensors might be able to detect buried metal through the layers of sediment that currently conceal it. Data processing capabilities might analyze the results fast enough to cover significant areas in reasonable timeframes. Until such technology is developed and deployed, Pamlico Sound will remain a vast, murky question mark in the search for Blackbeard's treasure. The human communities that inhabit coastal North Carolina have their own relationships with the Blackbeard legend, relationships that both help and hinder treasure hunting efforts. Local residents are sometimes valuable sources of oral tradition and historical knowledge. They can also be obstacles to searching, protecting their property and privacy from treasure hunters who might otherwise damage or disturb the landscape. The town of Ocracoke, located on the island where Blackbeard made his final stand, has embraced its pirate heritage as a tourism attraction. Visitors can take Blackbeard-themed tours, visit sites associated with the pirates' activities, and purchase souvenirs ranging from tasteful historical items to tacky pirate kitsch. The local economy benefits substantially from this tourist interest, and there's strong motivation to keep the Blackbeard legend alive and exciting. Local attitudes toward treasure hunters are more complicated. Long-time residents often regard treasure seekers with a mixture of amusement and annoyance. They've seen countless expeditions come and go, all making confident claims about knowing where the treasure is hidden, all leaving empty-handed. The locals have heard every theory, answered the same questions hundreds of times, and learned to be skeptical of anyone who claims special knowledge about Blackbeard's gold. At the same time, locals are often protective of potential treasure sites. If treasure is hidden on or near their property, they want to find it themselves or at least share in any discovery. They're suspicious of outsiders who might find something valuable and leave without sharing. Stories circulate about treasure hunters who made significant finds but concealed them to avoid legal complications, leaving the community with nothing. These stories, whether true or not, create hostility toward outside searchers. The oral traditions preserved by local families are potentially valuable historical sources. Stories passed down through generations might preserve information that never made it into written records. Details about unusual events, mysterious strangers, or unexplained discoveries could provide clues to treasure locations. Some treasure hunters have spent years cultivating relationships with local families, hoping to access this informal knowledge. But oral tradition is unreliable in ways that complicate its use. Stories change with each retelling, accumulating embellishments and errors over generations. What sounds like specific historical information might actually be a legend invented long after Blackbeard's death. Local storytellers sometimes tell treasure hunters what they want to hear, either for entertainment or in hope of reward. Distinguishing genuine tradition from invented folklore requires careful analysis and corroboration. The relationship between treasure hunters and local communities has sometimes turned adversarial. Treasure seekers who ignore private property rights, damage historical sites, or leave messes behind generate resentment that affects how all treasure hunters are received. Local ordinances restricting metal detecting and excavation have been enacted in response to problems caused by irresponsible searchers. Access that was once freely granted is now denied or requires permits and supervision. These community dynamics are part of the treasure hunting challenge. Success requires not just finding the right location, but navigating the social landscape of the communities where searching occurs. Treasure hunters who build positive relationships with local residents have advantages that purely technical approaches can't provide. The hours have passed, and we have journeyed together through every aspect of this enduring mystery. We have walked the beaches where Blackbeard walked, sailed the waters where he sailed, and wondered about secrets that have kept themselves for 300 years. The question we started with remains unanswered, and perhaps it always will. Where is Blackbeard's treasure? The evidence points in many directions without definitively indicating any single location. The curse stories suggest supernatural protection that can neither be proven nor disproven. The technology continues to advance, but fundamental obstacles remain. The landscape changes, obscuring any traces that might once have been visible. The searchers keep searching, driven by hope and obsession and the pure romance of the quest. What we can say with confidence is that the mystery itself is valuable. It connects us to a past that might otherwise be forgotten. It gives us something to wonder about, something to dream about, something to discuss and debate. Whether or not the treasure exists, the legend has enriched countless lives. It has inspired historical research, motivated archaeological investigation, and generated economic activity in communities that embrace their pirate heritage. Blackbeard himself would probably appreciate the enduring power of his reputation. He cultivated mystery during his life, making himself larger than human through careful manipulation of his image. The mystery has outlived him, grown beyond anything he could have imagined, taken on meanings that he never intended. His treasure, whether it consists of buried gold or simply the legend itself, continues to do what treasure is supposed to do. It fascinates, it motivates, it rewards those who seek it, even when the seeking itself is the only reward. Tonight, Somewhere on the North Carolina coast, waves are washing over beaches where Blackbeard once walked. The stars are the same stars he navigated by. The moon, the same moon that lit his pirate raids. The darkness holds its secrets as it always has, patient and permanent, waiting for dawn to reveal whatever it chooses to reveal. The treasure might be there, it might be anywhere, it might be nowhere at all. But the searching continues, and the mystery endures, and perhaps that's exactly how it should be. Some questions are more valuable unanswered than answered. Some mysteries are more precious than their solutions. Some treasures are best left hidden, inspiring dreams rather than filling bank accounts. Blackbeard's missing fortune might be the greatest treasure of all precisely because it has never been found. It remains pure possibility, unlimited potential, a dream that every generation can share. Rest well tonight. Dream of gold and islands and secrets that have waited centuries to be revealed. The treasure will still be there when you wake. It always is. It always will be. Good night. There is one more dimension to the Blackbeard treasure mystery that we have not yet fully explored: the psychology of the pirate himself. Understanding what kind of man Blackbeard was, how he thought, what motivated him, might provide insights into what he would have done with his accumulated wealth. This psychological portrait, assembled from historical fragments and reasonable inference, offers another perspective on the enduring mystery. Blackbeard was clearly intelligent, far more intelligent than the simple brute of popular imagination. His success required planning, negotiation, and strategic thinking. He managed crews of hundreds of men in an environment where mutiny was common and discipline was difficult to maintain. He navigated complex political relationships with colonial officials. He understood the value of reputation and deliberately crafted an image that served his practical purposes. This intelligence would have extended to his financial management. Blackbeard would have understood that wealth was useless if it couldn't be protected and eventually enjoyed. He would have thought about the future, about what might happen if his luck ran out, about how to preserve his earnings against various contingencies. The idea that such a man would spend everything without reserve seems inconsistent with everything else we know about him. Blackbeard also showed evidence of paranoia, a useful trait for someone in his profession. He trusted no one completely, not his crew, not his corrupt official partners, not even his wives. His act of shooting a crew member under the table, whether true or legendary, reflects an understanding that maintaining fear was essential to his survival. Someone who trusted no one would not have shared the location of his treasure with anyone. He would have kept that secret absolutely, even from those closest to him. This paranoid streak suggests that if Blackbeard buried treasure, he did so without witnesses. He might have used crew members to transport materials to a general area, but the final burial would have been done alone, under cover of darkness, with no one watching. The secret would have been his alone, written nowhere, shared with no one. Blackbeard's relationship with death also deserves consideration. He operated in a profession where life expectancy was short and death was always nearby. He would have been intimately familiar with mortality, having seen countless men die in battle, from disease, or on the gallows. This familiarity might have made him fatalistic about his own survival, while also motivating him to make provisions for various outcomes. A man who expected to die at any moment might bury treasure as insurance, a legacy that could be retrieved if he survived but would remain hidden if he didn't. The treasure becomes a bet on the future, an assertion of hope in an environment where hope was hard to maintain. Whether Blackbeard expected to return for his gold, or simply wanted to ensure that no one else would get it, the act of hiding it was meaningful. The smoking beard and demonic image also reveal something about Blackbeard's psychology. He was theatrical, enjoying performance and spectacle, taking pleasure in the fear he inspired. This theatrical streak might have influenced how he hid his treasure. A simple burial in an ordinary location wouldn't satisfy someone who thought in dramatic terms. He might have chosen a location with symbolic significance, created an elaborate concealment system, or left clues that would only make sense to someone who understood his particular way of thinking. Some treasure hunters have approached the search by trying to think like Blackbeard. They study his known behavior patterns, his apparent preferences, his documented decisions. They ask themselves what such a man would have done in various circumstances. This psychological approach hasn't led to discovery, but it has generated theories that make a certain kind of sense. the location that feels right psychologically. The place where Blackbeard would have hidden treasure if he were a character in a story about his life might be the actual location, or it might simply be a reflection of the searcher's own psychology, projected onto limited historical evidence. We can never really know what Blackbeard was thinking. But considering his psychology adds another dimension to the mystery, another way of approaching the question of where his treasure might be hidden. The passage of time has transformed the Blackbeard treasure mystery in ways that the original participants could never have anticipated. 3 centuries have passed since the pirate's death, long enough for empires to rise and fall, for technologies to advance beyond imagination, for the world itself to be transformed. Yet the mystery endures, passed from generation to generation, accumulating new layers of meaning with each retelling. In the 18th century, the treasure mystery was immediate and practical. People who had known Blackbeard personally might still be alive, able to share information about his activities and habits. The landscape where he operated was largely unchanged from how he knew it. The colonial authorities who had dealt with him still held their positions. Finding the treasure seemed like a realistic possibility for anyone with the right information and determination. In the 19th century, the mystery began its transformation into legend. The people who had known Blackbeard were long dead, and direct knowledge had faded into oral tradition and written accounts of varying reliability. The treasure became a symbol of the romantic pirate era, a connection to a past that seemed more colourful and exciting than the industrial present. Searching for the treasure was no longer purely practical, but also nostalgic, a way of touching a vanished world. In the 20th century, technology and scholarship transformed the search once again. Metal detectors, sonar and other devices offered new hope that science could succeed where earlier efforts had failed. Historians and archaeologists brought professional methods to the study of pirate history. The discovery of Queen Anne's Revenge demonstrated that physical remains from Blackbeard's career could be found and studied. The mystery seemed newly solvable, even as each new technology failed to locate the treasure itself. In the 21st century, the mystery has become a media property, a content franchise spanning documentary series, websites, podcasts, and social media. More people than ever before are aware of Blackbeard's missing treasure, though their knowledge is often filtered through entertainment media that prioritizes drama over accuracy. The treasure hunt has become spectacle, with cameras documenting searches that previous generations would have conducted in privacy. What will the mystery look like in the 22nd century or beyond? Will advancing technology finally solve it, or will the treasure remain hidden despite capabilities we cannot currently imagine? Will climate change transform the landscape so completely that any hidden treasure is lost forever? Will cultural changes make pirates seem less romantic, diminishing interest in their legends? Will artificial intelligence generate new theories, new search strategies, new approaches that human researchers haven't conceived? These questions cannot be answered, but considering them helps us understand the peculiar nature of enduring mysteries. The Blackbeard treasure mystery has persisted, not because it lacks solutions, but because it offers enough ambiguity to support hope while defying definitive resolution. Each generation can approach it fresh, bringing new tools and perspectives, finding new meanings in old stories. The mystery is renewable in a way that solved problems are not. A mystery that is solved becomes a fact, interesting but closed, no longer capable of generating dreams and speculation. A mystery that remains unsolved stays alive, open to interpretation, available for projection of contemporary concerns and desires. Blackbeard's treasure mystery has survived 3 centuries precisely because it has never been resolved. It remains a canvas on which each generation can paint its own picture of adventure, possibility, and hope. The question of whether Blackbeard's treasure exists at all deserves serious consideration. We have assumed throughout this exploration that there is treasure to be found, that the absence of discovery reflects the difficulty of searching rather than the absence of anything to search for. But this assumption should be examined critically. The evidence for a significant Blackbeard treasure cache is largely circumstantial. We know he captured many ships. We know those ships carried valuable cargo. We know that pirates typically accumulated wealth that far exceeded what they could spend. From these facts, we infer that Blackbeard must have had substantial treasure at the time of his death. But inference is not proof. There are alternative explanations for the absence of treasure that don't require hidden caches waiting to be discovered. One alternative is that Blackbeard really did spend most of his money. Pirates lived expensively, maintaining ships, paying crews, purchasing supplies, bribing officials. The economics of piracy involved high revenues but also high costs. A pirate who seemed fabulously wealthy might actually have been operating on thin margins, with most of his captures going to operational expenses rather than personal accumulation. Another alternative is that Blackbeard's wealth was less than legends suggest. His reputation was built on fear and theatre, not necessarily on actual financial success. A pirate who was skilled at marketing himself might have created an impression of wealth that exceeded reality. The legendary fortune might be mostly legend, an exaggeration that grew with each retelling until it lost connection to historical fact. A third alternative is that the treasure was found long ago but never publicly acknowledged. Someone might have discovered Blackbeard's cache in the years immediately after his death, when the landscape was still recognisable and the hiding place might have been more obvious. That person might have kept the discovery secret to avoid questions about ownership and origin. The treasure might have entered the colonial economy anonymously, converted to ordinary wealth that left no trace of its pirate origins. A fourth alternative is that the treasure was destroyed by natural processes. Buried metal corrodes over time, wooden containers rot away. Flooding, fire, earthquake, or other disasters might have scattered or consumed materials that were once concentrated and valuable. After 3 centuries, whatever Blackbeard buried might no longer exist in recognisable form. These alternatives don't prove that no treasure exists. They simply illustrate that the assumption of existing treasure is not beyond question. We search because we hope, not because we know. The treasure might be there, might have been there, might never have been there at all. This uncertainty is uncomfortable for those who have invested heavily in the search. Admitting that the treasure might not exist means admitting that years of effort might have been directed toward an illusion. But intellectual honesty requires acknowledging this possibility. The romance of the search should not blind us to the possibility that there is nothing to find. And yet, the mathematics persist. The ships were captured, the cargo was valuable, the money went somewhere. Even if legends have exaggerated the amounts, even if expenses consumed more than expected, even if some treasure was found and never reported, there should be something. The complete absence of any confirmed Blackbeard treasure over 3 centuries is itself a mystery that demands explanation. Either the treasure is extraordinarily well hidden, or something unusual happened to it. Both possibilities sustain hope for future discovery. The search continues not because we know the treasure exists, but because we cannot prove it doesn't. In the absence of proof either way, hope remains rational, and searching remains meaningful. The treasure might be the next shovel stroke away, or it might be a mirage that has fooled generations of dreamers. We won't know until someone finds it, or proves definitively that there is nothing to find. The night is nearly over now, and our exploration has reached its natural end. We have travelled through the life and death of Edward Teach, the pirate called Blackbeard, examining every aspect of the mystery he left behind. We have considered the historical evidence, the legendary embellishments, the search efforts, the psychological dimensions, the geological factors, the legal complexities, and the enduring allure that keeps people searching after 300 years. What have we learned? We have learned that Blackbeard was more than the simple demon of popular imagination. He was intelligent, strategic, and theatrical, a man who understood the power of image and reputation. He operated in a brutal world and succeeded through a combination of violence, cunning, and psychological manipulation. Whatever happened to his treasure reflects this complexity. We have learned that the search for Blackbeard's treasure is as much about the searchers as about the treasure itself. The men and women who have dedicated themselves to this quest reveal human needs for adventure, mystery, and possibility that transcend rational calculation. The treasure hunt is a secular pilgrimage, a quest for meaning as much as for money. We have learned that the landscape where treasure might be hidden has changed dramatically over 3 centuries, complicating any search. The dynamic coast of North Carolina, with its shifting sands and migrating islands, presents challenges that technology alone cannot overcome. Finding the treasure requires understanding not just where it might be today, but where it was when Blackbeard hid it. We have learned that legends and folklore, while unreliable as historical evidence, serve important cultural functions. The stories about Blackbeard's ghost, his deal with the devil, and his cursed treasure reflect the values and concerns of the communities that tell them. These stories will continue to evolve as long as the mystery remains unsolved. We have learned that the absence of discovery after 3 centuries is itself a kind of evidence, though evidence of what remains unclear. Either the treasure is hidden with extraordinary effectiveness, or it has been found and concealed, or it never existed in the forms that legends describe. Each possibility has implications for future searching. And we have learned, perhaps most importantly, that some mysteries are valuable precisely because they remain mysterious. The Blackbeard treasure hunt has enriched countless lives, inspired important research, and connected generations of dreamers to a shared fascination with the past. These benefits don't depend on actually finding the treasure. They flow from the search itself, from the hope and imagination that the mystery sustains. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, let the mystery settle into your dreams. Picture the North Carolina coast as Blackbeard knew it, wild and remote, full of hiding places that only he understood. Picture the treasure itself, whatever it might be, waiting in darkness for someone to finally discover it. Picture yourself as the one who finds it, holding 300-year-old gold in your hands, solving a mystery that has defeated everyone who came before. This dream has sustained treasure hunters for generations. It will sustain generations yet to come. Somewhere out there, the treasure might be waiting, and even if it isn't, the dream of it is treasure enough. The devil's gold, Blackbeard's missing fortune, a mystery that will never grow old, never lose its power to fascinate, never stop inspiring those who hear its story. Thank you for joining me on this long journey through history and legend. I hope the voyage has been as rewarding for you as it has been for me. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe so you don't miss the next exploration of forgotten history. Leave a comment if you have thoughts to share, and rest well tonight, knowing that some mysteries are eternal, some treasures are forever, and some stories are worth telling again and again. The treasure will still be there when you wake. It always is. Good night.